Welcome to War Sleep Stories. Today, we will be listening to relaxing war stories and sounds to make you fall asleep, but before that, kindly like and subscribe. Thank you.
The story of Operation Chopper. On the misty morning of January 12, 1962, the winds of change roared through the skies of South Vietnam. The whir of rotor blades heralded the arrival of something unprecedented, Operation Chopper, the first combat helicopter assault in the Vietnam War. This tale unfolds not through the eyes of one hero but through the shared experiences of soldiers, commanders, and civilians whose lives converged on this pivotal day. In the stillness before sunrise, the countryside of South Vietnam lay blanketed in the faint glow of the moon. Villages nestled among rice paddies seemed untouched by time, their quiet belied by the simmering tensions of war. In the city of Saigon, U.S. and South Vietnamese military commanders were gathered in a makeshift operations center, finalizing plans that had been in the works for weeks. Their objective was clear: to strike at the Viet Cong stronghold near the hamlet of Dinh Hoa. Captain Nguyen Xuyen Vinh, a South Vietnamese officer, stood by the map table, his brow furrowed with determination. He had witnessed firsthand the growing menace of the Viet Cong, and this operation was a chance to turn the tide. Alongside him was Major John Foster, an American advisor who had flown in weeks earlier. Despite their cultural differences, they shared a common goal, a victory that could bolster South Vietnam's fragile morale. As the sun began its ascent, a convoy of H-21 Shawnee helicopters, dubbed Flying Bananas for their distinctive shape, assembled at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Crews hurried to load supplies and ready the aircraft. Among them was Sergeant Tom Harris, an American mechanic who had never seen combat. He worked in silence, his thoughts consumed by the enormity of the mission ahead. Meanwhile, in Dinh Hoa, a young girl named Lin clutched her younger brother's hand. Her family had lived under the shadow of the Viet Cong for months. Though the soldiers claimed to be protectors, their presence brought fear and uncertainty. Lin's father whispered reassurances, but his eyes betrayed his worry as he scanned the horizon. As the first rays of sunlight kissed the horizon, the H-21 helicopters began their ascent. The rhythmic thumping of the rotor blades echoed across the airfield, a sound that grew louder with every passing second. Pilots and crew members exchanged brief nods, their faces set in grim determination. Operation Chopper was underway. Major John Foster sat in the lead helicopter, gripping the side handle tightly. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken acknowledgement that this was more than a test of strategy, it was a test of resilience. Beside him, Captain Nguyen Xuyen Vinh observed the ground below with an intensity that revealed his personal stakes in the mission. For him, this was not just a military operation, it was a fight for the survival of his homeland. In the village of Dinh Hoa, the Viet Cong had begun their day unaware of the incoming storm. Farmers tilled their fields, children played in the dusty streets, and sentries at the perimeter maintained a casual watch. They had grown accustomed to their superior knowledge of the terrain, confident that no enemy could catch them off guard. As the helicopters drew closer, the scene below began to change. The hum of approaching aircraft sent villagers scurrying for cover, and Viet Cong fighters scrambled to man their defenses. Lin and her brother huddled with their family in a small shelter, their father whispering urgent prayers. For a moment, time seemed to stand still as the silhouettes of the helicopters loomed larger on the horizon. The helicopters descended in formation, their engines roaring like thunder. Dust and debris swirled as the aircraft hovered just above the ground, their doors sliding open to reveal South Vietnamese troops ready to disembark. Captain Nguyen was among the first to leap onto the soil, his rifle at the ready. His men followed suit, spreading out in disciplined formation as they began to secure the area. The Viet Cong, initially caught off guard, quickly regrouped. Shots rang out from concealed positions, and the serene morning gave way to chaos. The helicopters, vulnerable during their descent, became targets for small arms fire. Sergeant Tom Harris, still aboard one of the hovering aircraft, worked feverishly to address a malfunction in the rotor system. His heart pounded as he heard bullets ping against the helicopter's frame, but he forced himself to focus. On the ground, Captain Nguyen led his men toward the heart of the village. His voice rose above the gunfire as he shouted orders, urging his troops to advance. The South Vietnamese soldiers fought with determination, their movements guided by weeks of preparation and the knowledge that this was their moment to shine. The battle raged on, each side exchanging volleys of gunfire. The Viet Cong, though outnumbered, used their intimate knowledge of the terrain to their advantage. They darted between houses and trenches, their movements swift and unpredictable. For every fighter taken down, another seemed to appear, their resolve undeterred by the overwhelming firepower of the helicopters. Above, the H-21 helicopters provided crucial support, their machine gunners laying down suppressive fire. Sergeant Harris, having successfully repaired the rotor system, leaned out to assist the gunners. His hands trembled as he fired his weapon, the weight of his action sinking in with every shot. In the chaos, Lin's family remained trapped in their shelter. The walls shook with every explosion, and Lin clung to her brother, her small body trembling. Her father peered out cautiously, searching for an opportunity to escape the crossfire. What he saw instead was a South Vietnamese soldier signaling for them to stay down, a moment of reassurance amidst the violence. As the sun climbed higher, the tide of the battle began to shift. The Viet Cong, realizing they were outmatched, began to retreat. Their withdrawal was not a sign of defeat but a strategic move, a reminder that their strength lay in evasion and survival. Captain Nguyen watched as the last of the fighters disappeared into the dense jungle, his chest heaving with both relief and frustration. The once quiet hamlet of Din Hoa now bore the scars of battle. Smoke rose from scattered huts, and the acrid smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. South Vietnamese troops moved cautiously through the village, their rifles raised as they cleared one structure after another. Captain Nguyen Xuyen Vinh led the way, his every step deliberate. His men followed in a tight formation, alert for any sign of lingering resistance. Inside a small, crumbling house, a soldier discovered a cache of Viet Cong weapons and propaganda materials. "Captain, over here," he called out, holding up a tattered booklet emblazoned with revolutionary slogans. Nguyen took the booklet and scanned its contents. It was a chilling reminder of the Viet Cong's influence over the local population, web of loyalty woven through fear and persuasion. Lin and her family were finally led out of their shelter by a South Vietnamese soldier. Her father carried her younger brother, their faces pale but relieved. Captain Nguyen approached them, his expression softening as he spoke in their native language. He assured them that they were safe now, though the war was far from over. For the soldiers, moments like these offered a brief reprieve, a reminder of the humanity they fought to protect. By mid-afternoon, the hamlet was under full control. The South Vietnamese and American troops established a temporary base, assessing their gains. The weapons cache, along with captured documents, was loaded onto helicopters for transport back to Saigon. As the soldiers rested briefly, the weight of the day's events began to settle on their shoulders. As the last helicopter lifted off, carrying wounded soldiers and confiscated materials, Major John Foster gathered the officers for a debrief. They stood in a semicircle near a makeshift command post, the sun beating down relentlessly. Foster's voice was steady, but his words carried a mix of praise and caution. "We achieved our primary objective," he began, pointing to a map spread on a crate. "But the Viet Cong's retreat shows their resilience. They know these jungles better than we ever could, and they'll be back." His gaze swept over the group, lingering on Captain Nguyen, who nodded solemnly. Captain Nguyen shared his perspective, speaking of the local population's fear and the Viet Cong's grip on the region. "We need to win their trust," he said. "Otherwise, the Viet Cong will return stronger, with more support than ever." His words resonated with the gathered officers, a sobering reminder that military victories alone could not secure peace. As the meeting concluded, the men dispersed, some to prepare for the journey back to Saigon, others to reflect in silence. For many, the day's events were a first taste of the complex and unrelenting nature of the Vietnam War. The convoy of helicopters departed Dinh Hoa as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The golden light bathed the battered landscape below, revealing the scars left by the day's battle. Soldiers sat silently in the cabins, their faces etched with exhaustion. For some, the day's events were a badge of honor. For others, they were a grim prelude to the challenges ahead. Sergeant Tom Harris leaned against the side of the helicopter, staring out at the passing jungle. The adrenaline that had carried him through the operation had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. He thought about the families caught in the crossfire, their lives forever changed. The war had become more real to him than ever before. Captain Nguyen sat beside Major Foster in another helicopter, their conversation subdued but meaningful. They spoke of the operation's successes and the lessons learned, both men acutely aware of the long road ahead. Nguyen's thoughts drifted to the villagers he had spoken with, their faces a mix of gratitude and apprehension. As the helicopters approached Saigon, the city's lights twinkled in the distance, a stark contrast to the darkness of the jungle. The men knew they would return to these skies soon enough, each mission shaping the course of the war, and their lives, in ways they could not yet foresee. The following day, reports of Operation Chopper's success spread through military channels and the media. It was hailed as a groundbreaking moment, the first major helicopter assault in the Vietnam War. The U.S. and South Vietnamese forces celebrated the victory, confident in the effectiveness of their new tactics. At Tan Son Hut Air Base, the returning soldiers were greeted with handshakes and congratulations. Captain Nguyen Xuyen Vinh felt a surge of pride but tempered it with caution. He knew this victory was but one step in a long and arduous journey. Major Foster echoed his sentiment during a briefing with senior commanders. "We've proven the concept," he said. "Now we need to refine it and adapt." Meanwhile, in Dinh Hoa, the villagers began to rebuild. Lin and her family returned to their home, picking through the rubble to salvage what they could. Their lives had been spared, but the shadow of war loomed ever closer. Lin's father spoke of leaving the hamlet for safer ground, but the family's ties to the land ran deep. Operation Chopper had set a precedent, a demonstration of what modern warfare could achieve. Yet for those who lived it, the operation was a reminder of war's unrelenting toll, a story that would unfold in countless chapters yet to come. In the days following Operation Chopper, both sides scrambled to frame the narrative of what had occurred. In Saigon, government officials and U.S. military advisors presented the operation as a resounding victory, a testament to the strength of their alliance. Press conferences were held, and photographs of helicopters in action were shared with international media. Major John Foster, though satisfied with the operation's outcome, was wary of the exaggerated triumphs being broadcast. "We've shown what helicopters can do," he confided to Captain Nguyen, "But let's not fool ourselves. The Viet Cong won't back down because of one operation." Nguyen nodded, his own doubts mirroring Foster's. He knew the Viet Cong would use their retreat to regroup, learn, and retaliate. Meanwhile, the Viet Cong seized on the opportunity to stoke fear and rally support. In underground networks, they circulated stories of their bravery and survival against overwhelming odds. Their leaders warned that the South Vietnamese and Americans could strike from anywhere, instilling both dread and resolve among their ranks. For the villagers of Dinh Hoa, the operation's impact lingered. Lin's father, like many others, debated whether to stay or flee. The Viet Cong's retreat left a void, but it would not remain empty for long. The people of the hamlet braced themselves, knowing they were pawns in a game far beyond their control. Back in Saigon, military analysts pored over the details of Operation Chopper. Every aspect of the mission, from the helicopter landings to troop coordination, was scrutinized. The findings were both encouraging and sobering. The use of helicopters had proven effective in deploying troops rapidly and bypassing traditional defenses, but the challenges of maintaining control on the ground became glaringly clear. Major Foster attended a strategy meeting with senior officers, including members of the Military Assistance Advisory Group, MAAG. Maps and charts adorned the walls, each marking potential targets for future operations. "Mobility is our advantage," Foster explained, gesturing to a diagram of the helicopter's flight paths. "But mobility alone isn't enough. We need sustained efforts on the ground to hold what we take." Captain Nguyen contributed insights into the cultural and psychological dimensions of the conflict. "The villagers don't see us as liberators yet," he cautioned. "They see soldiers, both ours and the Viet Cong, as intruders. We need to address their fears and their needs if we want their trust." His words resonated, though they would not be easy to implement in the chaos of war. As the meeting concluded, plans for future operations began to take shape. The success of Operation Chopper had opened new possibilities, but it also underscored the complexity of the fight ahead. For the soldiers who participated in Operation Chopper, the days that followed were a mixture of relief and reflection. Sergeant Tom Harris, back at Tan Son Nhut Air Base, found himself unable to shake the memories of the battle. He spent long hours maintaining the helicopters, his hands working mechanically as his mind replayed the sights and sounds of the mission. At the barracks, Harris spoke with a fellow mechanic, Private Mike Riley, about what they had witnessed. "It's not like I imagined," Harris admitted, staring at his cup of coffee. "You think about the glory, the action. But out there, it's just chaos. People scared, running. I don't know if I made a difference." Riley nodded, his own thoughts weighed down by the same uncertainties. Captain Nguyen visited his men, many of whom were still recovering from minor injuries or exhaustion. He made a point to speak with each soldier, listening to their concerns and encouraging them. "You did your duty," he told a young private who had frozen under fire. "The courage to move forward despite fear is what counts." For all involved, the operation left a mark, physical, emotional, and psychological. It was a harsh initiation into the realities of a war that would only grow more complex and brutal. As January drew to a close, the memory of Operation Chopper began to fade into the larger narrative of the war. Yet for those directly involved, its lessons remained fresh. The operation had demonstrated the power of helicopter mobility, but it had also hinted at the challenges of holding territory and winning hearts and minds. Major Foster prepared his report for Washington, detailing the tactical successes and the areas for improvement. He emphasized the need for better coordination between air and ground forces, as well as the importance of understanding the local population. "This war will not be won with firepower alone," he wrote, "but with persistence, adaptability, and the ability to connect with the people." In Din Hoa, Lin's family made the difficult decision to leave their home. The uncertainty of staying in a contested area outweighed their attachment to the land. They joined a growing number of refugees, their journey emblematic of the human cost of the conflict. Operation Chopper had been a victory on paper, but it was also a prelude, a fateful beginning to a war that would test the resolve of nations, armies, and individuals alike. The story of Operation ATTLEBORO. In the dense, rain-soaked jungles of Thanh Ninh Province, the Vietnam War reached a pivotal moment in late 1966. Operation ATTLEBORO, a seemingly routine sweep for Viet Cong supply lines, would transform into one of the largest search-and-destroy missions of the war. The operation's name, borrowed from a quiet town in Massachusetts, belied the chaos it would unleash. Soldiers from the United States, South Vietnam, and the Philippines moved cautiously through the oppressive heat, each step a gamble in a landscape teeming with unseen dangers. In the humid air, the promise of decisive confrontation hung heavy. The operation began on September 14, 1966, with the 196th Light Infantry Brigade leading the charge. Newly arrived in Vietnam, these soldiers were eager to prove themselves. Their orders were clear: locate and disrupt Viet Cong supply bases in the jungle northwest of Dao Tieng. Intelligence suggested the area was a hub for the 9th Viet Cong Division, a seasoned force adept at guerrilla warfare. Captain Samuel Brennan, a seasoned officer with a reputation for calm leadership, briefed his company. The tension in his voice was palpable as he outlined their mission. "Stay sharp," he warned. "The enemy knows this jungle better than we ever will. Trust your training." His words echoed in the hearts of his men, young and old, as they prepared to step into the unknown. The first few days were eerily quiet. Soldiers trudged through thick foliage, their boots sinking into muddy trails. The occasional crack of a branch set nerves on edge. Among them was Private First Class Jimmy O'Connor, a farm boy from Iowa. He wrote to his mother each night, describing the suffocating heat and the camaraderie that kept fear at bay. Unknown to the troops, Viet Cong scouts monitored their every move. The enemy was patient, biding time, waiting for the right moment to strike. On September 17, the silence shattered. A forward patrol stumbled upon a hidden Viet Cong supply depot. Crates of ammunition, medical supplies, and rice stood as testament to the enemy's resilience. Before the soldiers could secure the area, gunfire erupted. The Viet Cong, camouflaged and entrenched, launched a sudden counterattack. Sergeant Miguel Cruz of the Philippine Civic Action Group, PhilCAG, was among those pinned down. Though his unit primarily focused on civil aid, they were no strangers to combat. Cruz barked orders in Tagalog, coordinating a defense. The soldiers fought back fiercely, their M16 rifles cracking in rapid succession. The jungle became a cacophony of gunfire, shouting, and the distant roar of helicopters. Medevac Hueys hovered overhead, evacuating the wounded. Among them was Specialist Maria Santos, a combat medic from PhilCAG, who worked tirelessly to stabilize soldiers in the chaos. Her calm demeanor inspired those around her, even as she struggled to save lives under relentless fire. By nightfall, the Viet Cong withdrew, leaving behind casualties and a trail of destruction. The soldiers counted their losses and steeled themselves for the battles yet to come. General William E. Depew, commanding the 1st Infantry Division, recognized that the Viet Cong were more entrenched than anticipated. He ordered reinforcements, transforming Operation ATTLEBORO into a large-scale engagement. Artillery and airstrikes pounded suspected enemy positions as fresh troops arrived. Lieutenant Charles Nguyen, a South Vietnamese officer, played a crucial role in coordinating with American forces. Fluent in English and Vietnamese, he bridged the cultural and tactical divide. His leadership earned the respect of his counterparts, though he carried the weight of defending his homeland in a war that often felt out of his control. As the operation intensified, so did the dangers. Booby traps and landmines became a constant threat. Soldiers walked cautiously, scanning the ground with every step. Captain Brennan's company uncovered more supply depots, each one a small victory in a war defined by attrition. For Private O'Connor, the war had grown personal. He no longer wrote about the heat or the jungle. Instead, he recounted the faces of comrades lost and the resolve it gave him to see the mission through. By early November, Operation ATTLEBORO had stretched into weeks of tense encounters and sporadic firefights. The soldiers, worn but determined, pressed deeper into the dense jungles of Tay Ninh province. It was on November 3rd that the operation took a dramatic turn. A column from the 196th Light Infantry Brigade, patrolling a narrow trail, fell into a Viet Cong ambush near a heavily wooded area. The jungle erupted with gunfire as the Viet Cong, hidden in expertly crafted bunkers, unleashed a barrage of small arms and mortar fire. Lieutenant Charles Nguyen's South Vietnamese contingent, working in tandem with American troops, reacted swiftly. Nguyen's clear-headed commands under fire proved critical in organizing a counterattack. The soldiers spread out, using the underbrush for cover, as grenades exploded and bullets tore through the foliage. Among the chaos, Private First Class Jimmy O'Connor found himself separated from his unit. Crawling through the mud, he narrowly avoided enemy fire and stumbled into a clearing where a wounded comrade lay. Ignoring his own fear, O'Connor dragged the soldier to safety, his ears ringing from the constant gunfire. The ambush lasted hours, with air support eventually tipping the balance. UH-1 Huey swooped in, their machine guns blazing, and artillery from nearby bases rained down on Viet Cong positions. When the smoke cleared, the enemy had melted back into the jungle, leaving behind their dead and injured. The ambush underscored the Viet Cong's ability to turn the jungle into a weapon. General Depew ordered a shift in tactics, focusing on larger sweeps supported by air and artillery. The soldiers adapted, but the jungle remained an unforgiving adversary. Sergeant Miguel Cruz and his Philcag unit were tasked with clearing and securing supply depots uncovered during the operation. Working alongside American engineers, they dismantled booby traps and recovered caches of weapons. The meticulous work was exhausting, yet essential to crippling the Viet Cong's logistical network. Meanwhile, Specialist Maria Santos continued her tireless efforts as a combat medic. Her skills were tested daily as the casualty count climbed. One evening, she found herself tending to a young American soldier who had lost a leg to a landmine. Holding his hand, she spoke softly, offering reassurance despite the overwhelming sadness in her eyes. For Captain Brennan, the war had become a constant exercise in endurance. The strain on his men was evident, but he remained steadfast. "We've come this far," he told them during a rare moment of respite. "We'll finish what we started." His words carried weight, though they knew the enemy was far from defeated. As November wore on, intelligence reports indicated that the Viet Cong were regrouping for a major counteroffensive. In response, General Depew ordered a massive sweep near Dao Tiang, involving thousands of troops. The 1st Infantry Division, supported by artillery and airstrikes, moved to encircle the enemy. On November 6, the operation reached a fever pitch. Soldiers uncovered a sprawling Viet Cong base, complete with bunkers, tunnels, and supply caches. The scale of the discovery was staggering, a testament to the enemy's resilience and ingenuity. The Viet Cong fought fiercely to defend their stronghold. Battles erupted across the area, with mortar rounds and rocket-propelled grenades lighting up the jungle. Lieutenant Nguyen led his troops in a daring assault, charging an enemy bunker under heavy fire. His bravery inspired those around him, and his actions earned him commendation from his American counterparts. For Private O'Connor, the battle was a blur of noise and chaos. Yet, amid the carnage, he found moments of quiet heroism, helping evacuate the wounded and holding the line under relentless pressure. The jungle seemed alive with danger, every shadow a potential threat. By nightfall, the Viet Cong withdrew, leaving behind a treasure trove of supplies and a grim reminder of the war's cost. Operation ATTLEBORO had dealt a significant blow to the enemy, but the victory felt hollow. The soldiers knew the fight was far from over. With each passing day, Operation ATTLEBORO expanded into one of the largest search and destroy operations of the Vietnam War. By mid-November, the soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division and the 196th Light Infantry Brigade pushed deeper into enemy territory. Every step forward seemed to come at a cost, with casualties mounting and morale wavering under the strain of relentless combat. In the dense jungle near the Cambodian border, Sergeant Miguel Cruz's Philcag unit encountered an abandoned Viet Cong camp. The smell of stale food and burned wood lingered in the air. Scattered maps and documents hinted at plans for a counteroffensive, but deciphering the information would take time. Cruz's men worked tirelessly to secure the area, dismantling traps and cataloging supplies. Meanwhile, Private First Class Jimmy O'Connor, once a wide-eyed recruit, had become hardened by the realities of war. During a routine patrol, his unit discovered a series of underground tunnels. As O'Connor entered the dark, narrow passage, his heart pounded in his chest. The tunnels were a labyrinth, filled with hidden chambers, booby traps, and evidence of recent occupation. Above ground, Specialist Maria Santos coordinated with engineers to clear the tunnels safely. She marveled at the ingenuity of the Viet Cong but shuddered at the thought of the lives lost in their creation. Each day brought new challenges, yet Santos remained a steadfast presence, offering solace to those around her. The discovery of these tunnels provided critical intelligence, but it also underscored the immense effort required to root out the Viet Cong. For every gain made, the soldiers knew the enemy would regroup and strike back with equal ferocity. On November 15, UDA's forces near the village of Prek Klok found themselves under siege. The Viet Cong, determined to halt the advancing operation, launched a coordinated attack on the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry Regiment. It was a test of endurance for the American and South Vietnamese troops, who faced relentless assaults from well-entrenched enemy forces. Captain Brennan's company was among those called to reinforce the embattled unit. As they arrived, they were met with a harrowing sight, smoke rising from the jungle canopy, the sound of machine gun fire echoing in the distance. Brennan quickly organized his men, directing them to fortify their positions and provide cover for the wounded. Lieutenant Charles Nguyen played a pivotal role in coordinating artillery strikes. Standing amidst the chaos, he used his radio to call for precise barrages that turned the tide of the battle. Each explosion shook the ground, scattering the enemy and giving the defenders a chance to regroup. In the midst of the carnage, Specialist Maria Santos worked tirelessly to save lives. Her hands moved with practiced precision, tending to wounds and offering words of comfort. She carried a quiet determination, knowing her efforts meant the difference between life and death for many soldiers. After hours of fierce fighting, the Viet Cong began to retreat. The soldiers, exhausted and battered, took stock of their situation. The victory at Prek Klok was hard-earned, a testament to their resilience and determination. Yet, they knew the enemy was far from defeated, and the jungle still held many dangers. As Operation ATTLEBORO entered its final weeks, the scale of the operation became clear. Thousands of soldiers had scoured the jungle, uncovering massive supply depots and engaging in countless skirmishes. Despite their successes, the soldiers were acutely aware of the cost. Private O'Connor found himself reflecting on the transformation he had undergone. He was no longer the naive farm boy who had arrived in Vietnam months earlier. The faces of lost comrades haunted his dreams, yet he found solace in the camaraderie of his unit. "We're all we've got out here," he wrote to his mother. "We have to look out for each other." Sergeant Cruz and his Philcag unit continued their critical work, clearing booby traps and securing the supply lines. Their contributions, though often overlooked, played a vital role in sustaining the larger effort. Cruz took pride in his men's dedication, knowing their work saved lives. General Depew, observing the operation's progress, noted both the achievements and limitations of the campaign. While the Viet Cong had suffered significant losses, their ability to adapt and evade destruction highlighted the challenges of fighting a guerrilla force. Depew's after-action reports emphasized the need for continued innovation and coordination in future operations. By November 25, the operation officially ended. The soldiers returned to base camps, carrying the scars of the campaign. Operation ATTLEBORO had dealt a blow to the Viet Cong, but it also revealed the complexities of the war. The jungle, with its hidden dangers and unrelenting challenges, remained a battleground where victory was measured in inches rather than miles. The story of Operation BOLO. The year was 1967, and the Vietnam War raged on with relentless intensity. Above the dense jungles of North Vietnam, a new kind of battlefield emerged, the skies. Fighter jets streaked through the heavens, their engines roaring like thunder as they fought for dominance. For the United States Air Force, controlling the skies was crucial to halting enemy advances and ensuring the safety of ground troops. Yet, a formidable threat loomed above, North Vietnam's elusive MiG-21 fishbed jets, which struck with precision before vanishing into the clouds. In the early months of the year, American pilots grew increasingly frustrated. The MiG-21s were swift, nimble, and cunning. They rarely engaged in prolonged combat, relying instead on hit-and-run tactics. This strategy caused significant losses and left American airmen grasping at shadows. As these encounters unfolded, whispers of discontent echoed across U.S. airbases. The need for a solution grew urgent. Unknown to many, a bold plan was taking shape, a plan that would forever change the course of aerial warfare. At the heart of this plan was Colonel Robin Olds, a charismatic and battle-hardened pilot with a reputation for innovation. His mind raced with ideas as he pored over intelligence reports. Each line of data told a story of a clever and disciplined enemy. "We can't beat them with brute force," Olds often mused. "We need to outthink them." It was during one of these late-night strategy sessions that the seeds of Operation BOLO were planted. The operation's premise was as audacious as it was ingenious: trick the North Vietnamese into thinking they were attacking a vulnerable bomber formation, only to confront a squadron of heavily armed F-4 Phantoms lying in wait. It was a gamble, a high-stakes game of deception and strategy that would test the limits of American ingenuity and courage. North Vietnam's MiG-21s were more than just planes, they were symbols of resistance. Sleek and deadly, these aircraft were the pride of the Vietnam People's Air Force. Pilots like Tran Man, a young and determined airman, embodied the spirit of their mission. For Tran, each sortie was not just a fight for survival but a battle for his homeland's sovereignty. As he sat in the cockpit of his MiG, the tight confines of the plane offered a strange sense of freedom, a place where he felt powerful and invincible. Tran and his comrades were trained to exploit the weaknesses of their American adversaries. They mastered ambush tactics, using the rugged terrain and unpredictable weather to their advantage. In their world, speed and surprise were the keys to survival. Strike and disappear, their instructors often emphasized. The tactic worked, leaving American pilots frustrated and bewildered. On January 1, 1967, Tran received a briefing unlike any other. Intelligence suggested that a large formation of American bombers would be flying near Hanoi the next day. To Tran and his fellow pilots, it was a golden opportunity. The anticipation was electric as they prepared their jets, ensuring every system was in perfect condition. Little did they know that the Americans were planning a trap, a meticulously designed ambush that would bring their confidence crashing down. As Tran strapped himself into the cockpit, a sense of unease crept into his mind. The air was thick with tension, and the usual pre-flight camaraderie among pilots was subdued. He dismissed it as nerves, shaking off the feeling with a sharp exhale. "This is our moment," he thought, gripping the controls. He had no idea how close he was to flying into a storm of deception. Back at Ubon Royal Thai Air Force Base, Robin Olds and his team finalized the details of Operation BOLO. The plan relied on precise coordination and flawless execution. Olds had hand-picked the best pilots for the mission, each one a skilled aviator and a trusted ally. Among them was Major Daniel "Chappie" James Jr., whose calm demeanor and sharp instincts made him a vital part of the operation. The Phantoms were modified to mimic the flight patterns of slower F-105 bombers, a move designed to lure the MiG pilots into a false sense of security. Radar emissions, speed, and formation spacing were carefully adjusted to complete the illusion. Every detail was scrutinized, down to the radio chatter between the planes. "They'll think we're lambs," Olds said with a smirk, "but we'll be wolves in sheep's clothing." The morning of January 2, 1967, arrived with clear skies, a rare gift in the monsoon season. The Phantoms took off in silence, their engines roaring as they climbed into the heavens. Olds led the charge, his steely gaze fixed on the horizon. The calmness in his voice over the radio belied the intensity of the moment. "Stay sharp," he reminded his team. "This is it." As the Phantoms approached the target zone, they maintained the facade of vulnerability. Their movements were deliberately sluggish, an open invitation for the MiGs to strike. The trap was set, and all they could do now was wait. High above, the tension was palpable, every second stretching into an eternity. Olds glanced at his radar, his heartbeat steady but firm. The enemy was coming, it was only a matter of time. The clear skies above North Vietnam were deceptively serene as the Phantom formations advanced. Their deliberate mimicry of F-105 bombers painted a tempting picture for the enemy radar operators. At Gia Lam Air Base, the signals lit up the screens. North Vietnamese controllers, interpreting the radar signatures, were convinced they had a squadron of vulnerable bombers in their sights. Orders were relayed swiftly: scramble the MiGs. Tran Man and his wingmen were among those launched to intercept. Their MiG-21s roared to life, streaking into the sky with purpose. Tran's pulse quickened as his cockpit filled with the familiar hum of engines and the glow of his instrument panel. "This will be swift," he thought, adjusting his helmet. The briefings had emphasized American bombers' limited maneuverability, a perceived weakness they were eager to exploit. As the MiGs climbed toward their targets, the Phantom pilots waited in disciplined silence. The ambush depended on maintaining the illusion until the last possible moment. Robin Olds, leading the operation, kept a watchful eye on his radar. The enemy signatures were closing fast, and adrenaline surged through the cockpits of the American jets. When the first MiG formations appeared on the radar, Olds gave the command, "Phantoms, ready yourselves." The tone of his voice, calm yet resolute, cut through the tension. The trap was moments from springing. High above, the North Vietnamese pilots focused on their quarry, unaware of the hunters lying in wait. The MiG-21s closed in with speed and precision, their sleek silhouettes cutting through the sky like arrows. To Tran Man, the formation of bombers below seemed almost too easy. No escorts, he noted with suspicion. Yet, the chance to strike a significant blow against the Americans overshadowed his doubts. The Phantoms held their formation, their radar signatures maintaining the ruse. Olds' voice broke the tension over the radio, "Execute." In an instant, the sky erupted into chaos. The Phantoms broke from their docile patterns, accelerating and banking sharply to engage the approaching MiGs. The hunters had become the hunted. Tran's instincts screamed danger as he watched the bombers transform into agile fighters. "It's a trap," he shouted into his radio, pulling his MiG into a sharp climb. Around him, the skies turned into a deadly ballet of twisting contrails and roaring engines. The Phantoms, armed with advanced missiles and superior tactics, pursued the stunned MiGs with relentless determination. Robin Olds led the charge, his F-4 Phantom weaving through the air like a predator. "Stick to the plan," he reminded his squadron. Each Phantom pilot locked onto their targets with precision, the ambush achieving its devastating purpose. By the time the MiGs attempted to regroup, the tide of battle had already turned decisively against them. The dogfight intensified, with bursts of gunfire and missile trails crisscrossing the sky. Despite the shock of the ambush, Tran Man and his fellow MiG pilots fought with desperation. They relied on their aircraft's agility to evade the Phantom's missiles, but the Americans were relentless. For Tran, survival became his sole focus. He maneuvered his MiG into a series of sharp dives and climbs, narrowly evading a missile that streaked past his wing. His heart pounded as he scanned the skies for allies. "Where is everyone?" he muttered, the chaos around him making coordination impossible. Above the fray, Robin Olds and Daniel "Chappie" James Jr. orchestrated their squadron with precision. Each Phantom moved with purpose, targeting the MiGs while avoiding the traps of overextension. Their disciplined formations reflected the meticulous planning that had gone into Operation BOLO. The battle raged on for minutes that felt like hours. One by one, the MiGs fell, their pilots ejecting into the jungles below. By the end of the skirmish, 7 MiG-21s were confirmed destroyed, a catastrophic loss for the North Vietnamese Air Force. For the Americans, it was a resounding victory, achieved without a single loss of their own. As the remaining MiGs retreated, the Phantom pilots regrouped, their exhilaration tempered by the solemnity of combat. Robin Olds surveyed the battlefield from his cockpit, his sharp eyes noting the trails of smoke and the fading echoes of destruction. "Mission accomplished," he said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and reflection. Tran Man, his MiG damaged but still airborne, limped back toward his base. The weight of failure bore down on him, but he was alive, a small victory in the face of overwhelming defeat. He could not shake the image of the Phantoms springing their trap, their precision and strategy turning what should have been a victory into a devastating loss. At Yuban Air Base, the returning Phantom pilots were greeted as heroes. The success of Operation BOLO sent ripples through the military community, showcasing the power of strategy and innovation in aerial warfare. For Robin Olds and his team, the operation was a testament to the importance of outthinking the enemy, a lesson that would resonate throughout the Air Force. Yet, the war was far from over. For both sides, Operation BOLO was a reminder of the stakes they faced. In the skies above Vietnam, battles would continue to rage, each one shaping the course of history in its own way. As the Phantoms touched down at Yuban Royal Thai Air Force Base, a mix of exhaustion and triumph filled the air. Ground crews rushed to meet the returning aircraft, their cheers mingling with the fading roar of engines. For Robin Olds, stepping out of his Phantom was a moment of quiet reflection. His face, marked by hours of intense concentration, softened as he took in the sight of his squadron safely back on the tarmac. Inside the briefing room, the pilots gathered to review the mission. Maps and radar data filled the walls, recounting every maneuver of the ambush. Olds stood at the head of the room, his presence commanding yet approachable. This was a team effort, he began, his voice steady. We caught them off guard, but more importantly, we executed with precision. The room buzzed with energy as pilots recounted their experiences. Major Daniel "Chappie" James Jr. shared his view of a key engagement, his calm demeanor masking the split-second decisions he had made in the heat of battle. Laughter broke out when one pilot described narrowly dodging debris from a falling MiG. Yet, amidst the camaraderie, there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the stakes. For Olds, the debrief was as much about celebration as it was about learning. Every detail mattered: what worked, what didn't, and how to adapt for future missions. Operation BOLO was a resounding success, but it was also a reminder that their enemy was cunning and would not remain complacent for long. News of Operation BOLO's success spread rapidly, reaching the upper echelons of the United States Air Force. For weeks, American pilots had been on the defensive, their morale dampened by the elusive MiG-21s. Now, the tide had turned. The destruction of 7 MiGs in a single operation was more than a tactical victory, it was a psychological one. At the Pentagon, military planners analyzed the mission's implications. The strategy behind Operation BOLO was lauded as a masterpiece of deception, and Robin Olds became a household name among Air Force leadership. Reports from the field emphasized the precision of the ambush, painting a picture of American ingenuity at its finest. For the North Vietnamese, the loss was a bitter pill to swallow. At Gia Lam Air Base, Tran Man and his comrades faced the somber aftermath. Their debriefs were marked by frustration and introspection. "How did we not see it coming?" one pilot asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. The North Vietnamese commanders, though disheartened, were already devising new tactics to counter the Americans' growing confidence. Across both sides of the conflict, Operation BOLO was a turning point. It demonstrated the power of strategic planning and the high stakes of aerial warfare. While the Americans celebrated, they also knew that the skies over Vietnam would remain a dangerous and unpredictable battleground. Operation BOLO was dissected in meticulous detail by military analysts and historians alike. The mission's success hinged on elements that seemed simple yet required flawless execution, deception, timing, and coordination. The Phantom pilots had flown with remarkable discipline, maintaining their formations and mimicking the flight patterns of bombers until the critical moment. Colonel Robin Olds became a vocal advocate for innovation in air combat. His philosophy was clear: war isn't just about firepower. It's about outthinking your enemy. His leadership during Operation BOLO set a new standard for aerial tactics, inspiring a generation of pilots to approach combat with creativity and adaptability. The MiG-21s, once considered untouchable, were now seen as vulnerable to well-coordinated strategies. However, this revelation brought its own challenges. The North Vietnamese adapted quickly, refining their tactics to counter future ambushes. For the United States, the victory was a reminder that the war's dynamics were constantly shifting. Despite the challenges ahead, Operation BOLO remained a symbol of what was possible when strategy and execution aligned. It was a testament to the power of teamwork, ingenuity, and the human spirit in the face of adversity. The legacy of Operation BOLO extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of the mission. In airbases across Southeast Asia, pilots studied the operation, eager to replicate its success. Training exercises incorporated the lessons learned, emphasizing the importance of adaptability and strategic thinking. Robin Olds, now a celebrated figure, continued to lead by example. His passion for mentoring young pilots became evident as he shared his experiences and insights. "The enemy will always adapt," he reminded them. "Our job is to stay one step ahead." His words resonated deeply, inspiring confidence and determination among his squadron. For Tran Man, the memory of Operation BOLO lingered like a shadow. He often replayed the events in his mind, searching for answers. What could we have done differently, he wondered. Despite the setback, his resolve remained unshaken. The loss had steeled his determination to fight smarter, to honor his comrades who had fallen in the skies above North Vietnam. As the war continued, Operation BOLO became a touchstone, moment that captured the complexity and stakes of aerial combat. It was a reminder of the power of innovation and the resilience of those who fought, shaping the course of history one mission at a time. The story of Operation Tiger Hound. In the dense jungles of southeastern Laos, a quiet tension lingered beneath the canopy. It was December 1965, and the Vietnam War had reached a critical juncture. North Vietnamese forces were using the Ho Chi Minh Trail, a complex network of hidden supply routes, to transport troops and equipment. In response, the United States launched Operation Tiger Hound, a covert bombing campaign designed to disrupt this lifeline. For 3 tumultuous years, the operation would unfold in secret, a shadow war waged in an unfamiliar land. The humid air carried the buzz of distant propellers as planes sliced through the sky, their mission clear yet perilous. Below, soldiers, villagers, and spies moved in a chaotic dance of survival and strategy. The jungle, with its sprawling trees and meandering rivers, became both shield and battleground. This is the story of Operation Tiger Hound, a tale not of one hero but of many lives entwined in a relentless effort to shape the tide of war. Each chapter delves into the harrowing missions, the lives of those who fought, and the enduring cost of a campaign that would test the limits of human resilience. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was no ordinary pathway. To the untrained eye, it was merely a tangle of jungle, but to the North Vietnamese, it was a lifeline stretching from the communist north to the embattled south. For the United States, it was an elusive enemy, its maze of trails and tunnels defying detection. By late 1965, reconnaissance flights confirmed what many suspected: the trail's activity was growing, and the stakes were higher than ever. Major James Callahan, an Air Force navigator stationed in Thailand, studied grainy photographs of the jungle terrain. Lines of trucks and figures carrying supplies blurred into the green haze. His task was simple in theory: guide bombing runs to disrupt this network. Yet, as the first missions were planned, the scale of the challenge became clear. On the ground, North Vietnamese engineer Nguyen Phuc oversaw the construction of new routes, often working through the night to avoid detection. He knew the airstrikes would come, but he also knew the stakes. Each new path meant more troops and supplies could reach the south, bolstering the Viet Cong's fight. Phuc's hands bore the marks of his labor, calloused palms and cuts from sharp jungle undergrowth. As the operation commenced on December 5, 1965, American planes roared overhead, their payloads lighting up the night. Villagers in remote Laotian settlements stared in silent awe and terror as explosions painted the sky. For Nguyen Phuc, it was a signal to adapt. For Major Callahan, it was a question: had they done enough to turn the tide? The success of Tiger Hound depended on accurate intelligence. In early 1966, Captain Linda Carter, a young officer with a knack for photo analysis, was assigned to a covert unit analyzing aerial reconnaissance. Her days were spent poring over images captured by RF-101 Voodoo reconnaissance jets, identifying enemy movements and hidden caches. One photo stood out: a dense patch of jungle near Ban Phanuc with telltale signs of activity, tire tracks, cooking fires, and camouflaged bunkers. Linda marked the image for further investigation. By the time the report reached Major Callahan, plans were underway to target the area. Above the jungle, Air Force pilot Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Walker prepared for a low-altitude reconnaissance run. His plane, an Agile F-4 Phantom, was equipped with cameras and minimal armament. As he descended, the jungle seemed to close in around him, its emerald canopy broken only by fleeting glimpses of the trail below. Suddenly, anti-aircraft fire erupted, tracers streaking toward his plane. Tommy banked sharply, evading the fire, but not without consequence. A round struck his left wing, and the cockpit shuddered violently. He managed to steady the plane and climb to safety, capturing crucial images in the process. Back at the base, Captain Carter examined his photographs, the marks of the trail now etched in sharper detail. Their efforts brought results. Bombing runs targeted key nodes of the trail, leaving craters and destruction in their wake. Yet, for every stretch disrupted, the North Vietnamese adapted, carving new routes and doubling their resolve. Tiger Hound, it seemed, was a battle not only of firepower but also of wits and will. By mid-1966, the challenges of Operation Tiger Hound intensified. The North Vietnamese had grown adept at concealing their movements, and their anti-aircraft defenses had become more sophisticated. To counter these developments, the U.S. relied increasingly on Special Operations Forces, tasked with penetrating the dense jungle and gathering critical intelligence. Staff Sergeant Michael "Mick" Ramirez, a member of a covert long-range reconnaissance patrol (LRRP) team, crouched low in the undergrowth near Ban Nap. His squad had been inserted deep into Laotian territory, their objective to locate anti-aircraft emplacements and report enemy troop movements. The jungle was stifling, the air heavy with humidity and the scent of damp earth. As they moved, the team encountered signs of enemy activity, discarded ration tins, fresh boot prints, and the distant hum of truck engines. Ramirez gestured for his men to halt. Through the foliage, they spotted a convoy of trucks, camouflaged with palm fronds, heading south. They radioed the coordinates back to their base, knowing airstrikes would soon follow. Hours later, the thunderous roar of B-52 Stratofortresses shattered the stillness. Bombs rained down on the convoy's path, the earth trembling under the assault. Ramirez and his team watched from their concealed position, their mission complete, but their extraction was far from guaranteed. The North Vietnamese, aware of American patrols, scoured the jungle in search of intruders. For Ramirez, survival meant silence and patience as enemy soldiers combed the area. As the operation expanded, the U.S. introduced advanced technology to gain the upper hand. In late 1966, the Black Spot program deployed modified C-123 provider aircraft, equipped with sensors to detect heat signatures from enemy trucks and camps. These silent hunters patrolled the skies at night, their sensors peering through the darkness. Major Eric Matheson, a pilot with the program, recalled his first mission over the trail. The cockpit lights were dimmed to avoid detection, and the eerie glow of the sensor displays cast shadows across the faces of the crew. Below, the jungle stretched out like a sea of ink, punctuated by faint glimmers of enemy activity. The sensors picked up movement, a cluster of trucks moving under the cover of darkness. Matheson relayed the coordinates to the Tactical Air Control Center, and within minutes, F-4 Phantoms were dispatched to intercept. The strike was precise, the explosions below illuminating the night sky. However, the North Vietnamese were quick to adapt. They began using decoys, lighting fires away from their actual positions to mislead the sensors. For Matheson and his crew, each mission became a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where ingenuity often made the difference between success and failure. While the U.S. sought to disrupt the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the people of Laos bore the brunt of the conflict. The small village of Nong Bua, nestled near the trail, found itself at the center of the storm. For the villagers, the war was a distant concern until the bombing began. Van, a rice farmer, lived with his wife and 2 young children. One night, the roar of jet engines startled them awake, followed by a series of deafening explosions. The ground shook, and the air filled with the acrid scent of burning vegetation. Van and his family fled to the nearby hills, seeking refuge. The following day, Van ventured back to the village, his heart heavy with dread. The once thriving community lay in ruins, homes reduced to rubble and fields scorched. The villagers began to rebuild, but their lives had changed forever. They lived in constant fear, their days punctuated by the distant rumble of bombers and the knowledge that the war could reach them again at any moment. Operation Tiger Hound, for all its military objectives, left scars on the land and its people. Each bombing run brought questions: had they struck the intended target, or had innocents paid the price? For the villagers of Nong Bua, the answers mattered little. Their lives were forever entwined with a conflict they neither caused nor understood. As Operation Tiger Hound entered its second year, the air war intensified, and so did the casualties. For pilots like Lieutenant Thomas "Tommy" Walker, each mission carried the weight of knowing that not everyone would make it back. By 1967, anti-aircraft defenses along the Ho Chi Minh Trail had grown more effective, turning the skies over Laos into a deadly gauntlet. During one mission, Tommy and his wingman, Captain Jerry Blake, flew low over a section of the trail near the Mujia Pass. Their objective was to destroy a newly discovered supply depot. As they approached, enemy tracers lit up the sky, a deadly web of fire reaching for their planes. Tommy banked hard, narrowly evading a direct hit, but Jerry wasn't as lucky. Tommy's radio crackled with Jerry's voice. "Mayday, mayday. I'm hit." Seconds later, Tommy saw a plume of smoke as Jerry's plane went down. He called for a rescue mission, but deep in enemy territory, the odds were slim. Search and rescue teams faced incredible danger, and though they scoured the area for days, Jerry was never found. The loss weighed heavily on Tommy. Each empty chair at the mess hall, each missing comrade, was a stark reminder of the cost of war. For the men of Tiger Hound, the trail was more than an objective, it was a graveyard for friends and dreams. While American forces relied on advanced technology and firepower, the North Vietnamese countered with ingenuity. Nguyen Phuc, the engineer who oversaw sections of the trail, became a master of adaptation. Bomb craters were filled within hours, and wooden bridges replaced those destroyed by airstrikes. Fuchs' crews worked tirelessly, often under the cover of darkness. By day, they camouflaged their work with tree branches and mud, making it nearly invisible from the air. Despite constant bombing, the trail remained operational, a testament to their determination. In one particularly daring operation, Fuchs' team constructed an underground fuel depot hidden beneath a dense grove of trees. They used bamboo pipes to distribute fuel, bypassing exposed storage tanks. The system allowed supply trucks to refuel quickly without stopping at vulnerable above-ground stations. The Americans eventually discovered the depot, but not before it had served hundreds of trucks. Fuchs' ingenuity became legendary among his peers, a symbol of the North Vietnamese resolve to keep the trail open at any cost. For many Americans, the war in Laos was a mystery. Officially, it didn't exist. The secrecy surrounding Operation Tiger Hound extended to the forces on the ground, including the CIA-backed Hmong guerrillas. Led by General Vang Pao, these soldiers played a crucial role in the fight to disrupt the trail. Operating from the highlands of Laos, the Hmong conducted reconnaissance and ambushes, their knowledge of the terrain unmatched. Their efforts provided invaluable intelligence to U.S. forces, often at great personal risk. One mission saw a small Hmong unit ambush a convoy near the Ban Karai Pass. Armed with little more than rifles and grenades, they struck quickly, disabling several trucks before melting back into the jungle. The attack delayed supplies for days, giving U.S. bombers time to target the disrupted route. For the Hmong, the stakes were deeply personal. They weren't just fighting for an ally, they were defending their homeland. Yet, as the war dragged on, their sacrifices grew heavier. Families were displaced, villages destroyed, and countless lives lost in a conflict that few in the world even knew existed. By 1968, it was clear that Operation Tiger Hound faced significant challenges. Despite relentless bombing, the Ho Chi Minh Trail continued to function, a testament to the North Vietnamese ability to adapt and endure. The dense jungle and rugged terrain provided natural cover, and the enemy's ingenuity turned every obstacle into an opportunity. In Washington, debates raged over the effectiveness of the campaign. Was it worth the cost in lives and resources? Generals argued for more strikes, while critics pointed to the mounting civilian casualties and the resilience of the trail. One critical setback occurred in the A Shau Valley, where a major supply hub had been identified. A massive airstrike was planned, involving dozens of B-52 bombers. However, due to poor weather and faulty intelligence, the bombs missed their targets, hitting nearby villages instead. The resulting civilian deaths fueled anti-war sentiment back home and deepened the mistrust between the U.S. and the Laotian people. For the men on the ground and in the air, such failures were demoralizing. Pilots like Tommy Walker questioned the mission's purpose, while Hmong fighters like General Vang Pao struggled to rally their troops. The jungle seemed endless, the enemy unstoppable, and the war unwinnable. By mid-1968, Operation Tiger Hound had become a war of attrition. For every section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that American bombers disrupted, the North Vietnamese repaired it within days. The trail evolved into a sprawling network of roads, footpaths, and even waterways, defying the best efforts of U.S. forces to bring it to a halt. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Kincaid, overseeing bombing missions from Nakhon Phanom Air Base in Thailand, studied reconnaissance reports with growing frustration. The enemy's ability to rebuild was staggering. Bomb craters were filled, new bypass routes emerged overnight, and bamboo bridges replaced those destroyed. One area of intense focus was the Ban Laboy Ford, a critical crossing where the trail navigated through steep terrain. Despite multiple bombing campaigns, including the use of napalm and cluster munitions, the crossing remained operational. Pilots like Tommy Walker knew it well, referring to it grimly as the Hydra, a place where every strike seemed to generate 2 new targets. In the jungles below, Nguyen Phuc and his engineering crews toiled ceaselessly. They worked under the cover of darkness, often enduring airstrikes while repairing roads and bridges. Phuc's team developed ingenious methods, such as using logs soaked in water to reinforce makeshift structures, allowing trucks to cross safely even under bombardment. The persistence of the trail was a testament to the North Vietnamese strategy: endure, adapt, and outlast. For the Americans, it was a sobering reminder of the limits of air power. The covert nature of Operation Tiger Hound meant that many of its battles remained hidden from public view. In the dense jungle of Laos, the air war raged alongside a shadowy ground campaign. CIA-backed forces, including Hmong guerrillas and covert U.S operatives, engaged in deadly skirmishes with North Vietnamese troops. In August 1968, Captain Daniel Morgan, a member of the Studies and Observations Group, SOG, led a mission to locate a hidden supply depot near the BOLO Plateau. The team inserted via helicopter, landing in a clearing just before dawn. They moved cautiously through the jungle, their every step muffled by the thick undergrowth. After 2 days of reconnaissance, they discovered the depot, a sprawling network of underground bunkers and camouflaged storage areas. Morgan radioed for an airstrike, marking the target with smoke grenades. Moments later, the roar of jet engines shattered the silence as F-4 Phantoms unleashed their payloads. The attack was devastating, but the mission wasn't over. The team had to exfiltrate before enemy reinforcements arrived. As they retreated, the jungle erupted with gunfire. North Vietnamese soldiers closed in, and Morgan's team fought desperately to hold them off. A helicopter extraction came just in time, lifting them to safety as the jungle below swarmed with enemy troops. The depot was destroyed, but the cost was high. 2 members of Morgan's team were killed, and the mission underscored the perilous nature of Tiger Hound's shadow war. By November 1968, Operation Tiger Hound was drawing to a close. The campaign had inflicted heavy losses on the North Vietnamese, but it had failed to achieve its ultimate goal, cutting off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The operation ended as U.S strategy shifted toward Vietnamization, leaving South Vietnamese forces to take on a greater role in the war. Major James Callahan, who had overseen countless missions, reflected on the campaign's mixed legacy. The airmen and ground forces had fought valiantly, but the enemy's resilience had proven insurmountable. The trail remained a lifeline for the North, its survival a symbol of their determination. For Nguyen Phuc, the end of Tiger Hound was a moment of quiet triumph. He and his comrades had endured years of relentless bombing, yet the trail continued to function. The war was far from over, but they had weathered one of its fiercest storms. As the last bombers returned to their bases, the jungle began to reclaim the scars of war. Craters filled with water, becoming ponds where birds sang and fish swam. Yet, beneath the surface, the echoes of the conflict lingered, a reminder of the lives lost and the unyielding human spirit that defined both sides. Operation Tiger Hound left an indelible mark on those who lived through it. For the American pilots and ground crews, it was a test of courage and endurance. For the Hmong guerrillas and Laotian villagers, it was a fight for survival. For the North Vietnamese, it was a testament to their ability to adapt and persevere. Years later, historians would debate the effectiveness of the campaign. Some argued that it bought time for U.S. forces in South Vietnam, while others pointed to the heavy civilian toll and the trail's continued operation as evidence of its failure. In the jungles of Laos, remnants of the war could still be found, rusting bomb casings, crumbling bunkers, and the faint outlines of the trail that had defied so many attempts to destroy it. For those who walked its paths, it was more than a military route. It was a story of resilience, sacrifice, and the enduring cost of war. The story of Operation Steel Tiger, a chronicle of war. In the heart of Southeast Asia, a covert theater of war unfolded. The year was 1965, and the Vietnam War raged on with unrelenting ferocity. Hidden beneath dense canopies and winding trails lay a network of supply routes, the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. This lifeline for North Vietnamese forces was both a testament to their ingenuity and a strategic thorn for the United States. As whispers of infiltration through Laos reached American ears, the skies above the region darkened, not with storms but with the thunderous roar of aircraft. This was the dawn of Operation Steel Tiger, a campaign that would span years and test the resolve of nations. In this chronicle, we journey through the operation itself, piecing together the stories of the individuals and decisions that shaped its legacy. Through the eyes of a fighter pilot, a Laotian villager, a North Vietnamese courier, and a HOUND strategist, we delve into the human tapestry of war, exploring courage, despair, and resilience amidst a backdrop of geopolitical turmoil. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was no ordinary pathway. Stretching through the rugged terrain of Laos and Cambodia, it served as a critical artery for the North Vietnamese, supplying weapons, food, and reinforcements to the Viet Cong in South Vietnam. For the United States, this intricate network posed a challenge they could not ignore. In early 1965, intelligence reports painted a grim picture: supplies were flowing unabated, and the war effort in South Vietnam was at risk of faltering. In a small room at an airbase in Thailand, American military strategists pored over maps, their brows furrowed in concentration. Colonel Edward Carson, an experienced air operations officer, traced a finger along the winding trail. "This is where we'll strike," he said, pointing to a segment deep in southeastern Laos. The operation would be named Steel Tiger, a codename designed to inspire both fear and precision. The goal was clear: disrupt the enemy's lifeline by targeting key segments of the trail with relentless aerial bombardment. Meanwhile, in a quiet village near the trail, 23-year-old Nguyen Van Quoc prepared for another day as a courier. His mission was simple yet perilous: transport ammunition to a hidden depot along the trail. "They're watching us from the skies," his commander warned. Nguyen's heart raced as he adjusted his pack, knowing the risks he faced. The jungle offered cover, but it was no match for the sophisticated surveillance equipment and deadly payloads of American bombers. As the first wave of aircraft thundered across the Laotian skies, Nguyen's instincts screamed danger. The explosions were deafening, ripping through the trees and carving craters into the earth. From his cockpit, Captain James Morgan, a HOUND pilot, marveled at the precision of their strikes. Yet, he felt a pang of unease. This isn't just a trail, he thought. There are lives down there, people caught in the crossfire. By the summer of 1965, Operation Steel Tiger was in full swing. The skies over southeastern Laos became a battleground as HOUND planes conducted daily bombing runs. F-105 Thunder Chiefs, nicknamed Thuds, delivered their payloads with surgical precision, while reconnaissance planes scoured the landscape for new targets. The operation was coordinated from a command center in Thailand, where officers monitored the progress of each sortie. In the village of Ban Dong, the airstrikes brought terror and devastation. Residents scrambled for safety whenever the telltale hum of approaching bombers echoed through the valley. Among them was Som Chai, a 40-year-old Laotian farmer. His fields, once lush with crops, now lay scorched and barren. "We are caught between giants," he lamented to his wife. Yet, like many others, he had no choice but to stay, clinging to the remnants of a life upended by war. Back at the airbase, Captain Morgan and his squadron reviewed their missions. The mood was somber. "We're hitting the targets," Morgan reported, "but the trail is like a hydra. Cut one head, and two more appear." The enemy's resilience was unnerving. North Vietnamese engineers worked tirelessly to repair bombed sections, often under the cover of darkness. Their ingenuity was legendary, camouflaging supply routes, building underground storage facilities, and even using bicycles to transport heavy loads. Nguyen Van Quoc, now hardened by weeks of dodging airstrikes, felt a growing determination. "For every bomb they drop, we will rebuild," he vowed. His resolve mirrored that of his comrades, who saw the trail not as a weakness but as a symbol of their resistance. The intensity of Operation Steel Tiger escalated in 1966. The United States deployed additional resources, including advanced radar systems to detect movement along the trail. For the pilots, the missions were grueling, pushing them to their physical and emotional limits. "Every flight feels like a gamble," Morgan confided to his wingman, Lieutenant Tom Harris. The threat of anti-aircraft fire loomed large, with enemy gunners becoming increasingly adept at targeting American planes. Losses on both sides mounted. The U.S. Air Force recorded dozens of aircraft shot down over Laos, their wreckage scattered across the jungle. For the families of fallen pilots, the pain of loss was compounded by the secrecy surrounding the operation. Officially, the United States was not engaged in combat in Laos, a fact that kept Steel Tiger shrouded in mystery. On the ground, Nguyen and his unit faced their own trials. A particularly devastating bombing raid destroyed a key supply depot, forcing them to retreat deeper into the jungle. "We've lost so much," one of his comrades whispered, staring at the smoldering remains. Yet, even in the face of such setbacks, their commitment to the cause never wavered. For Nguyen, the trail was more than a supply route, it was a lifeline for their dream of reunification. As the year drew to a close, the question lingered in the minds of those involved: was the operation achieving its goals? For Morgan, the answer was unclear. "We're doing our job," he reflected, "but at what cost? And for how long?" In early 1967, Operation Steel Tiger entered its third year, marked by intensifying airstrikes and escalating stakes. The jungle, once a vibrant green, now bore scars of relentless bombardment. Smoke rose from bomb craters, intertwining with the mist that shrouded the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail, however, remained operational, a testament to the ingenuity and determination of the North Vietnamese forces. For Captain James Morgan, the war had become an endless cycle of missions. Each sortie brought him over familiar landscapes of destruction, yet the enemy's resilience was undeterred. "They rebuild faster than we can destroy," he noted in a briefing. The enemy's tactics evolved constantly. Supply trucks now traveled under heavy camouflage, and entire sections of the trail were relocated or rebuilt overnight. Nguyen Van Quoc, too, adapted to the unyielding conditions. His courier missions had grown more dangerous as American reconnaissance planes patrolled the skies. He had learned to read the sounds of engines and the patterns of bombers, a skill that often meant the difference between life and death. One fateful day, as Nguyen guided his convoy through a dense thicket, the sudden roar of approaching aircraft sent them scrambling for cover. "Stay low and keep moving," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the explosions. In the village of Ban Phom, Somchai and his neighbors faced a daily struggle for survival. Bombs had destroyed their homes, leaving them with makeshift shelters and dwindling supplies. Despite their plight, they found moments of resilience. "We will not abandon our land," Somchai declared, echoing the sentiment of many Laotians caught in the crossfire. For them, the war was not about strategy or politics, it was a fight for survival. The secrecy surrounding Operation Steel Tiger weighed heavily on those involved. Officially, the United States denied conducting airstrikes in Laos, an omission that shielded the operation from public scrutiny but left its participants isolated. Families of downed pilots were told little, their questions met with vague reassurances. For Captain Morgan, the lack of transparency added to his growing disillusionment. "We're risking our lives for a war no one will acknowledge," he confided to Lieutenant Harris. In Washington, policymakers debated the operation's effectiveness. The trail remained active despite the immense resources poured into its disruption. Military leaders advocated for continued bombing, arguing that it slowed the flow of supplies, even if it couldn't completely sever the route. Detractors, however, questioned the human and financial cost of the campaign. Reports of civilian casualties and displaced villagers began to filter through, sparking quiet unease among some officials. Nguyen Van Quoc, unaware of the debates in far-off capitals, focused on his mission. Each successful delivery felt like a small victory against a powerful adversary. Yet, the constant danger took its toll. One night, as Nguyen rested by a campfire with his comrades, he spoke of his fears. "Will this war ever end?" he asked. The question hung in the air, unanswered but felt by all. For Somchai's family, the war's toll was deeply personal. One evening, a stray bomb struck the village's communal well, cutting off their water supply. "We can't live like this," Somchai's wife said, tears streaming down her face. Yet, the family stayed, rooted by their connection to the land and each other. By mid-1967, the United States introduced more sophisticated technology to the campaign. Sensor-laden devices, known as Igloo White, were deployed along the trail, transmitting data on enemy movements. These sensors, combined with advanced radar and reconnaissance, allowed for more precise targeting. The hope was that this technological edge would tip the balance in favor of the U.S. For pilots like Morgan, the new tools were both a blessing and a curse. While they improved mission accuracy, they also highlighted the immense scale of the trail network. "It feels like trying to hold back the ocean with a bucket," Morgan remarked after a particularly intense mission. The frustration was palpable among his peers, many of whom began to question the operation's long-term viability. On the ground, Nguyen and his comrades adapted to the heightened surveillance. They developed countermeasures, such as deploying false convoys to distract bombers and using the jungle's dense foliage for concealment. One evening, as Nguyen guided a truck laden with supplies, he noticed the glint of a sensor hidden among the leaves. "They're watching us," he warned, his voice filled with urgency. The convoy quickly altered its route, narrowly avoiding an ambush. In Ban Phom, the villagers faced their own turning point. A particularly devastating airstrike left several families without shelter. Somchai, now a de facto leader in the community, organized an effort to rebuild. "We must rely on each other," he told his neighbors. Amidst the destruction, their unity became a beacon of hope. As 1968 began, Operation Steel Tiger reached its climax. The United States intensified its bombing campaign, with thousands of sorties flown each month. The jungle trembled under the weight of explosive ordnance, and the trail's scars deepened. Yet, the North Vietnamese persisted, their resolve unbroken despite the mounting losses. For Captain Morgan, the missions became a blur of fire and steel. Each sortie was a test of nerves as anti-aircraft fire lit up the sky. "We're flying into a wall of death," one pilot remarked after a particularly harrowing mission. Morgan nodded silently, his mind heavy with thoughts of the men he had lost. On the ground, Nguyen's determination was matched only by his weariness. His unit had suffered heavy casualties, and the constant airstrikes left them on edge. Yet, they pressed on, driven by a shared belief in their cause. "The trail is our lifeline," Nguyen reminded his comrades. "We cannot let it fall." For the villagers of Ban Phong, the new year brought little relief. Supplies were scarce, and the constant danger left them with frayed nerves. Yet, they clung to small acts of defiance, planting crops in bomb craters, sharing meals under the stars, and telling stories of resilience. "They can destroy our homes, but not our spirit," Somchai declared, his words a testament to their enduring will. As the spring of 1968 unfolded, the Ho Chi Minh Trail became more than a route, it was a battlefield. The North Vietnamese, aware of the relentless aerial assaults, escalated their efforts to defend the trail. Anti-aircraft batteries and ground forces were stationed at critical junctions, ready to engage the American planes that thundered overhead. Nguyen Van Quoc's role as a courier grew more perilous with each passing day. The once simple task of delivering supplies had turned into a deadly game of hide-and-seek. During one mission, as his convoy approached a river crossing, the distinctive whine of an American reconnaissance plane pierced the air. "Scatter and hide!" Nguyen shouted, and the convoy dispersed into the dense jungle. Moments later, a string of bombs tore through the canopy, leaving behind a scene of devastation. For Captain James Morgan, the increased resistance was palpable. "It feels like the jungle itself is fighting back," he remarked to his wingman after a narrow escape from anti-aircraft fire. The skies over Laos were no longer dominated by the U.S. Air Force, they were contested by an enemy determined to protect its lifeline at all costs. In the village of Ban Phong, the constant bombardment pushed the villagers to their limits. Somchai and his neighbors began constructing underground shelters, digging into the red earth for safety. "If the surface belongs to the war, we will claim the depths for ourselves," he declared. The shelters offered temporary reprieve, but the psychological toll of living under siege was inescapable. By the summer of 1968, the cost of Operation Steel Tiger became undeniable. The U.S. Air Force had lost over 100 aircraft, their wreckage scattered across the jungle. For the families of fallen pilots, the secrecy surrounding the operation compounded their grief. Letters home were carefully censored, and official statements offered little clarity. Captain Morgan found himself writing one such letter after losing his wingman during a mission. "Tom was a brave man," he wrote, struggling to find the right words. "He believed in what we were doing, and he gave his life for it." The loss weighed heavily on Morgan, deepening his doubts about the operation's effectiveness. On the ground, Nguyen and his comrades paid an equally steep price. Injuries and illness were rampant, and the relentless airstrikes left little room for rest. During one mission, Nguyen's truck was hit by shrapnel, forcing him to abandon the supplies and flee into the jungle. "We will rebuild, but at what cost?" he wondered as he tended to his wounds. In Ban Phong, the villagers faced a humanitarian crisis. With their crops destroyed and access to clean water limited, malnutrition and disease spread rapidly. Somchai's wife fell ill, and the village's only healer could do little to help. "The bombs are killing us slowly, even when they miss," Somchai lamented, his voice heavy with despair. As the monsoon season arrived in late 1968, the challenges of Operation Steel Tiger became more apparent. Heavy rains turned the jungle into a muddy quagmire, complicating both aerial and ground operations. For the U.S. military, the question loomed, was the operation worth the immense resources it demanded? At a strategy meeting in Thailand, Colonel Edward Carson reviewed the latest intelligence. The trail remains active, he admitted, but our efforts have slowed the enemy's supply lines. Some argued that this partial success justified the campaign, while others pushed for a re-evaluation. "We're throwing stones at a river," one officer remarked. "It may ripple, but it keeps flowing." Nguyen, now a seasoned courier, noticed the shift in the enemy's strategy. The airstrikes became less frequent but more targeted, focusing on bridges and choke points. "They're adapting," he told his commander. "But so are we." His unit devised new ways to bypass the damaged sections, using boats and even human chains to ferry supplies across rivers. In Ban Phong, the rains brought temporary relief from the bombing but introduced new hardships. Flooding destroyed what little remained of the villagers' crops, and the underground shelters became waterlogged. Yet, amidst the adversity, they found moments of hope. Somkai's wife recovered from her illness, and the villagers pooled their resources to plant a new field. "We will endure," Somchai declared, his words a quiet defiance against the forces tearing their world apart. By November 1968, the political landscape in the United States had shifted. Growing anti-war sentiment at home and the impending presidential election brought increased scrutiny to military operations in Southeast Asia. Under pressure, the U.S. government announced a halt to bombing in North Vietnam, effectively ending Operation Steel Tiger. For Captain Morgan, the final missions were bittersweet. As he flew his last sortie over the trail, he couldn't help but reflect on the past 3 years. "We gave everything we had," he thought as he watched the jungle below. The trail, though battered, remained active, a stark reminder of the enemy's resilience. Nguyen Van Quoc felt a similar mix of emotions. With the airstrike ceasing, his missions became less perilous, but the scars of war lingered. "We survived," he told his comrades, "but at what cost?" The trail, now a symbol of their resistance, stood as a testament to their sacrifices. In Ban Phong, the end of the bombing brought cautious relief. Somchai and his neighbors began rebuilding their lives, though the shadow of war remained. The village, like the trail, bore the scars of conflict, but its spirit endured. "This is our home," Somchai said, planting a tree in the center of the village. "We will make it whole again." The story of Operation Barrel Roll. It was the early 1960s, and the dense jungles of Laos were shrouded in more than just mist. A quiet war brewed beneath the lush canopy, unseen by most of the world but vital to the superpowers embroiled in the Cold War. The Vietnam War raged on to the east, but the battlefront had expanded. The United States sought to cripple North Vietnamese forces by disrupting their lifeline, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Thus began a covert campaign shrouded in secrecy and shadows, Operation Barrel Roll. In the villages of northeastern Laos, life carried on amidst the faint roar of passing planes. Farmers tended their fields while soldiers from distant lands prepared for war. This was no conventional battlefield, it was a place of covert operations, where alliances were fragile, and the cost of war was paid not just in blood but in the erosion of trust and sovereignty. Over the next 9 years, the skies over Laos became the stage for one of the most secretive campaigns in history. Bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes darted through the clouds, delivering destruction to unseen targets. Yet the trail persisted, and the human cost mounted. It was a war in the shadows, fought by soldiers, spies, and villagers alike, each with their story to tell. The year was 1962, and the world's attention was fixed on the escalating tensions of the Cold War. In Laos, a nation caught between the rivalries of communism and democracy, the Pathet Lao, a communist insurgent group, grew in strength. The Geneva Accords, intended to neutralize Laos, were signed, yet the ink had barely dried before violations began. North Vietnam continued its incursions, using Laos as a corridor to supply its forces in the south. Major General Vang Pao, a Hmong leader, watched these developments with a mix of dread and determination. His people, fiercely independent and skilled in guerrilla warfare, were poised to become key allies of the United States. In the shadows, American operatives reached out to Vang Pao, offering weapons and training in exchange for his cooperation against the Pathet Lao. Meanwhile, in Washington, President John F. Kennedy was briefed on Laos. Maps of the Ho Chi Minh Trail sprawled across tables in the Situation Room, marking supply routes snaking through the jungles. The Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed airstrikes, but Kennedy hesitated. Open intervention would violate the Geneva Accords. Instead, covert operations were greenlit, and the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, took charge. It was the beginning of what would later become Operation Barrel Roll. By 1964, the situation had deteriorated further. North Vietnamese trucks rolled down the trail, laden with supplies bound for Viet Cong forces. The CIA, working with Vang Pao's Hmong forces, launched reconnaissance missions to pinpoint targets. The goal was clear: to disrupt the trail without drawing global attention. On December 14, 1964, the first airstrike of Operation Barrel Roll commenced. Two American F-105 Thunder Chiefs roared over the Laotian jungle, their payloads aimed at a truck convoy reported by Hmong scouts. The explosions echoed through the valleys, sending plumes of smoke skyward. Yet, as the bombers returned to their bases, North Vietnamese engineers were already clearing the debris. In the villages below, the Hmong bore the brunt of the retaliatory strikes. Farmers, who once toiled in peace, now sought refuge in caves. Vang Pao rallied his people, promising support from the Americans. Supplies were parachuted in, and the Hmong fighters, known as butterflies for their swift movements, launched ambushes on the trail. Despite their efforts, the trail remained operational. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was no mere road, it was a labyrinth of pathways, often rebuilt within hours of an attack. For every strike, there were new routes, new ways for the North Vietnamese to evade detection. The Americans realized they were not fighting a single enemy but an adaptable and relentless system. The campaign intensified as 1965 dawned. Barrel Roll expanded its scope, targeting bridges, supply depots, and bivouacs. Pilots flying over Laos described the surreal beauty of the landscape, marred by the craters they left behind. Beneath them, Hmong fighters marked targets with smoke signals, their role crucial but often unsung. In Washington, discussions grew heated. Reports from the field painted a grim picture: despite the airstrikes, the North Vietnamese were advancing. Analysts debated the effectiveness of the campaign. Was it truly possible to halt the flow of supplies? And at what cost? For the villagers of Laos, the war became an unending nightmare. Children played near unexploded ordnance, unaware of the danger. Elders whispered stories of spirits angered by the bombs. Yet amidst the destruction, resilience blossomed. Families rebuilt their homes, and soldiers found ways to endure. Vang Pao's forces gained a reputation for their ferocity. The Hmong, despite their limited resources, became a thorn in the side of the North Vietnamese. Yet they knew this was just the beginning. The jungles of Laos hid many secrets, and the trail was only growing stronger. The summer of 1965 brought a new level of intensity to Operation Barrel Roll. What had begun as isolated airstrikes now escalated into a full-fledged bombing campaign. By day, F-105 Thunderchiefs and F-4 Phantoms swept the skies, while at night, lumbering B-52 Stratofortresses unleashed their payloads. The jungles of northeastern Laos reverberated with explosions, as one target after another was obliterated, or so it seemed from the air. On the ground, North Vietnamese engineers worked tirelessly. Destroyed bridges were rebuilt, bomb craters filled in, and new supply caches hidden beneath dense foliage. Their ingenuity seemed boundless. To counter this, the Americans deployed advanced reconnaissance technology. Spy planes like the RF-101 Voodoo and drones captured detailed imagery, but even with this edge, the Ho Chi Minh Trail proved elusive. Hmong fighters played an increasingly vital role. Equipped with American radios, they guided bombers toward hidden depots and camouflaged truck parks. Often, they fought on two fronts, against the Pathet Lao and the North Vietnamese. Their determination was unmatched, but their losses mounted. Villages were razed in retaliation, and refugees streamed into makeshift camps. Vang Pao pleaded for more support, knowing his people's survival depended on the success of this shadowy war. Meanwhile, in Washington, frustration grew. Intelligence reports highlighted the resilience of the trail and the inability of air power alone to sever it. Doubts crept into high-level discussions, but for now, the campaign continued. Barrel Roll was not just a military operation, it was a test of will, resources, and strategy. By 1966, two groups came to embody the covert war over Laos, the Butterflies and the Ravens. The Butterflies were Vang Pao's Hmong fighters, who navigated the terrain with uncanny precision, relaying enemy positions and directing strikes. They moved swiftly, like their namesake, vanishing into the jungle after each mission. The Ravens, on the other hand, were a secretive band of American forward air controllers, FACs. Flying small, unarmed Cessna O-1 Bird dogs or T-28 Trojans, these men risked everything to mark targets with smoke rockets for incoming bombers. Their work was perilous. The low altitudes and slow speeds of their planes made them easy prey for anti-aircraft fire. Yet their expertise in coordinating strikes was unmatched. Captain Dave "Tex" Morgan was one such raven. A former fighter pilot, Tex had volunteered for this clandestine assignment, drawn by the thrill and the promise of making a difference. He spent long hours in the air, his plane weaving through valleys and hills. The Hmong, with whom he worked closely, nicknamed him Rog Quam, the swift bird. The Butterflies and Ravens forged a bond built on mutual respect. Together, they disrupted convoys, destroyed hidden bunkers, and harried the North Vietnamese forces. Yet, as their successes grew, so did the risks. Anti-aircraft defenses were bolstered, and losses on both sides mounted. Still, the Butterflies and Ravens pressed on, driven by duty and the hope that their sacrifices were not in vain. Operation Barrel Roll was waged under a strict veil of secrecy. Officially, the United States was not at war in Laos. This fiction dictated the rules of engagement, which often hindered operations. Pilots were instructed to avoid civilian areas and to ensure plausible deniability in every mission. Strikes were limited to pre-approved targets, vetted by intelligence agencies and military planners. In practice, these constraints bred frustration. Targets were often missed due to weather, poor intelligence, or last-minute restrictions. Pilots returned to base with unused ordnance, knowing their quarry had escaped. For the Butterflies and Ravens, who risked their lives to pinpoint these targets. Such missed opportunities were bitter pills to swallow. Compounding these challenges was the North Vietnamese mastery of deception. Fake supply depots, decoy convoys, and deliberate misinformation sowed confusion. The Americans relied heavily on the Hmong for on-the-ground verification, but even their valiant efforts couldn't always counter the enemy's cunning. Despite the obstacles, some missions achieved dramatic success. One such instance was the destruction of a key bridge along the trail in late 1966. For weeks, North Vietnamese convoys were forced to detour, allowing Vang Pau's forces to ambush supply lines. It was a rare victory in a war of attrition, but it proved fleeting. Within months, the bridge was rebuilt, stronger than before. The years between 1967 and 1968 saw the campaign enter a grueling phase. For every success, there was an equal setback. American planes dropped thousands of tons of bombs, but the Ho Chi Minh Trail continued to function. The jungles of Laos became a seesaw battlefield, with control shifting daily. Tex Morgan's missions grew ever more dangerous. Anti-aircraft artillery now dotted the landscape, and surface-to-air missiles, SAMs, posed a new threat. Tex witnessed the loss of several comrades, their planes erupting in fireballs as they plunged into the jungle below. Each loss weighed heavily, but there was no time to grieve. The missions had to continue. The Hmong fighters were similarly stretched thin. Their villages were targeted by Pathet Lao forces, and their ranks dwindled under the relentless pressure. Yet their spirit endured. They believed in the promise of a free Laos, even as that vision seemed increasingly distant. Through it all, Operation BARELL pressed on. The skies over Laos remained alive with the roar of engines and the burst of flak. For the people below, it was a storm that seemed to have no end. Yet in the chaos, stories of bravery, resilience, and sacrifice emerged, offering glimmers of hope amidst the darkness. By 1968, the skies over northeastern Laos had become a cauldron of conflict. The North Vietnamese, adapting to years of bombardment, fortified their defenses along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Anti-aircraft artillery, camouflaged beneath the jungle canopy, became a formidable deterrent. Pilots in Operation BARELL now faced deadly odds each time they took to the air. Captain Tex Morgan's missions grew more perilous with every sortie. On one fateful morning, his Cessna O-1 Bird Dog skimmed over the treetops, guiding bombers toward a supply depot. A sudden burst of flak erupted, and his plane shuddered violently. Smoke filled the cockpit, and his engine sputtered. Tex wrestled with the controls, narrowly managing to glide into a clearing. As he leapt from the wreckage, Hmong fighters emerged from the jungle, their rifles at the ready. They escorted him to safety, their silent determination a testament to the bond forged between the Americans and their allies. In response to mounting losses, the U.S. Air Force deployed newer, more advanced aircraft, including the F-111 Aardvark, capable of flying low and fast to evade radar. These planes, equipped with precision-guided munitions, struck key choke points along the trail. The destruction was immense, but the trail was far from broken. For every bridge destroyed, another was quickly built. The North Vietnamese soldiers displayed a resilience that frustrated their American adversaries. For the Hmong, the escalating air war brought both hope and despair. They celebrated each successful mission, but the cost was steep. Villages were abandoned, and entire families displaced. Yet Vang Pau's leadership held them together. His charisma and promises of a brighter future kept morale alive, even as the war seemed to stretch endlessly into the horizon. The Tet Offensive of 1968 in Vietnam rippled across the region, altering the trajectory of Operation Barrel Roll. The surprise attacks by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces shocked the American public and intensified calls for an end to the war. In Laos, the offensive emboldened the Pathet Lao, who launched their own attacks on Royal Lao Army positions. The escalation demanded a broader response from the United States. Barrel Roll's missions were expanded, targeting not only the Ho Chi Minh Trail but also Pathet Lao strongholds. Bombing sorties grew more frequent, and entire swathes of jungle were incinerated. The Royal Lao Army, bolstered by American air power, attempted to reclaim lost territory. For the Hmong, the offensive was a turning point. Vang Pao's forces found themselves on the front lines, defending key positions from Pathet Lao assaults. The Butterflies, with their intimate knowledge of the terrain, launched daring counterattacks, often striking under the cover of night. Their successes were celebrated, but their losses were devastating. Tex Morgan, now flying T-28 Trojans, felt the strain of the expanded mission. His days were consumed by back-to-back sorties, and his nights haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. The war had become a relentless grind, but he knew the stakes were higher than ever. The trail had to be stopped, no matter the cost. The North Vietnamese adapted yet again in 1969, reinforcing their logistical network with underground tunnels and shelters. These innovations shielded their troops and supplies from even the heaviest bombardments. The jungle itself seemed to conspire against the Americans, its dense foliage providing cover for hidden truck convoys and anti-aircraft guns. Barrel Roll's pilots began flying missions under treacherous conditions. Monsoon rains turned the skies into a chaotic mess, with visibility reduced to mere feet. Still, the bombers pressed on, guided by the Ravens and their Hmong counterparts. One mission saw Tex Morgan narrowly avoid disaster when his plane's instruments failed mid-flight. With the help of a Hmong ground unit, he managed to navigate back to base, his nerves frayed but his resolve unshaken. The Hmong fighters faced their own trials. Constantly on the move, they operated from hidden camps, their resources stretched thin. Supplies dropped by American planes often fell into enemy hands or were damaged upon impact. Yet the Butterflies persisted, their loyalty to Vang Pao and their dream of an independent Laos driving them forward. In Washington, the operation's effectiveness was scrutinized. Critics argued that the relentless bombing campaigns were yielding diminishing returns. Yet for the soldiers in the field, the fight continued. They had no choice but to adapt, endure, and hope that their efforts were making a difference. By 1970, Operation Barrel Roll had become one of the longest-running air campaigns in U.S. history. Yet its goals remained elusive. The Ho Chi Minh Trail, though battered, still functioned, and North Vietnamese forces continued to outmaneuver their adversaries. For many involved in the operation, a sense of futility began to set in. Tex Morgan, now a seasoned Raven, felt the weight of the war more keenly than ever. Each mission brought new dangers, and the losses among his fellow pilots were mounting. He found solace in his bond with the Hmong, whose unwavering spirit reminded him of the importance of their mission. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that they were fighting a battle they couldn't win. In the villages of Laos, the toll of the war was staggering. Fields lay fallow, schools abandoned, and families scattered. The Hmong clung to their traditions, finding comfort in rituals and songs that spoke of resilience and hope. Vang Pao, though weary, continued to inspire his people, reminding them that their sacrifices were not in vain. Meanwhile, in the corridors of power, debates raged over the future of the operation. Some advocated for a full-scale invasion of Laos to decisively cut the trail, while others pushed for a negotiated settlement. For now, BARELL endured, a testament to the complexity and tragedy of war in the shadows. The Battle of DRANG. In November 1965, the remote DRANG Valley in South Vietnam became the backdrop of a harrowing confrontation between the United States Army and the North Vietnamese Army, NBA. It was the first major battle to use air mobility, a strategy that would shape modern warfare. The dense jungle, ominous mountains, and hidden enemy lines turned the valley into a deadly theater of war. Soldiers on both sides would enter the fray carrying hopes, fears, and a shared uncertainty about what awaited them. The story of the Battle of DRANG unfolds not only in the clash of armies but also in the lives of individuals caught in the maelstrom. Their voices interweave into the larger narrative of strategy, sacrifice, and survival. This tale captures the human and historical dimensions of a battle that changed the course of the Vietnam War. The year was 1965, and tensions in Vietnam were escalating. The United States had recently committed ground troops to counter the growing threat of communist expansion in Southeast Asia. General William Westmoreland, the commander of U.S. forces, devised a bold strategy that emphasized air mobility to strike deep into enemy territory. The DRANG Valley, located near the Cambodian border, was chosen as the test ground for this new approach. The North Vietnamese, however, were no strangers to warfare. Under General Chu Huy Man, they devised an intricate strategy to lure American forces into their strongholds. The rugged terrain of DRANG was perfect for ambushes and guerrilla tactics. For the NVA, this battle was a chance to prove their mettle against a technologically superior foe. As intelligence reports trickled in, Colonel Helmore of the U.S. 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, prepared his men for what lay ahead. Moore, a West Point graduate and a firm believer in leading from the front, studied the maps and devised a plan to secure landing zone X-ray, deep in enemy territory. He understood the risks but was determined to execute his mission with precision. On November 14, 1965, the skies above the DRANG Valley roared with the sound of UH-1 Huey helicopters ferrying soldiers to landing zone X-ray. For many young men aboard, it was their first taste of combat. The rotor blades whipped the tall grass as the first wave of soldiers leaped onto the ground, rifles ready. Colonel Helmore was among the first to land, immediately organizing his troops to establish a defensive perimeter. The valley was eerily quiet, the thick jungle around them masking any sign of the enemy. The tension was palpable, every rustle of leaves or crack of a branch sending ripples of unease through the ranks. Unknown to the Americans, hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers lay hidden in the dense foliage, watching their every move. The NVA, under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Huyen, had carefully planned their ambush. Their objective was to encircle and annihilate the American forces before they could establish a foothold. As the sun began to set, the first shots rang out. The silence of the valley shattered as the battle erupted in full force. The Americans found themselves under heavy fire from all directions, their defensive lines strained to the breaking point. Yet, under Moore's calm leadership, they held their ground, determined to survive the night. While the main force at LZ X-ray fought to repel wave after wave of attackers, a platoon led by Lieutenant Henry Herrick became isolated from the rest of the battalion. Herrick's unit had been scouting the jungle when they stumbled upon a large group of North Vietnamese soldiers. A fierce firefight ensued, and the platoon was quickly surrounded. Realizing their dire predicament, Herrick radioed for help. His calm voice belied the chaos around him as he described the enemy's movements and their desperate situation. Despite heavy losses, Herrick and his men dug in, forming a makeshift defensive position in a dry creek bed. As night fell, the lost platoon faced relentless attacks from the NBA. With limited ammunition and mounting casualties, their survival depended on the arrival of reinforcements. Meanwhile, at LZ X-ray, Colonel Moore scrambled to coordinate a rescue mission, knowing that every second counted. For the men of the lost platoon, the night was a blur of gunfire, explosions, and desperate prayers. Each soldier clung to life, driven by sheer will and the hope that help would come before it was too late. At dawn on November 15th, reinforcements finally arrived at LZ X-ray. Helicopters carrying additional troops and supplies braved enemy fire to land amidst the chaos. The sight of reinforcements bolstered the spirits of the beleaguered defenders, but the battle was far from over. Colonel Moore ordered a second push to rescue the lost platoon. The soldiers advanced cautiously, their every step met with resistance from the NBA. The jungle seemed to come alive with gunfire as the Americans pressed forward, determined to save their comrades. Meanwhile, the lost platoon clung to hope. They had held out through the night, repelling repeated assaults despite dwindling supplies. Each passing moment felt like an eternity as they awaited rescue. Finally, after hours of intense fighting, the relief force reached the lost platoon. The sight of friendly faces brought tears to the eyes of the exhausted survivors. But the price of their rescue was steep, with heavy casualties on both sides. As the sun climbed higher on November 15th, the battlefield at Landing Zone X-ray became a cacophony of chaos. The North Vietnamese army, determined to overrun the Americans, launched a series of coordinated assaults. Each attack was more ferocious than the last, testing the resolve of Colonel Moore's men. The soldiers dug deeper into their positions, the ground trembling under the impact of mortar shells. Machine guns roared as the Americans poured fire into the advancing enemy ranks. Despite their numerical advantage, the NBA faced a wall of resistance as the U.S. troops fought fiercely to hold their ground. Above the battlefield, the iconic UH-1 Hueys darted through the sky, bringing in supplies and evacuating the wounded. Pilots like Bruce Crandall and Ed Freeman braved enemy fire time and again, their heroics saving countless lives. Their helicopters became lifelines, connecting the embattled soldiers to the outside world. By midday, the Americans had established a 360-degree defensive perimeter. Though surrounded and under constant attack, their determination remained unbroken. Colonel Moore, walking the lines to rally his men, embodied calm and courage, instilling confidence in his troops despite the overwhelming odds. While the Americans fought valiantly at LZ X-ray, the toll of the battle began to weigh heavily on both sides. The jungle floor was littered with the casualties of war, men who had given their lives for causes they believed in. The cries of the wounded mingled with the thunder of gunfire, a grim reminder of the human cost of the conflict. Among the American ranks, medics worked tirelessly to tend to the injured. Private Joseph Galloway, a journalist covering the battle, found himself thrust into the fray. Armed with little more than a camera, Galloway helped carry the wounded to safety, his bravery earning him the respect of the soldiers. The North Vietnamese, too, suffered tremendous losses. Yet, their resolve remained unshaken. General Chu Huy Man, commanding from afar, ordered his troops to press on, knowing that victory here would bolster morale across their ranks. For the NBA, every sacrifice was a step toward their ultimate goal of liberation. As night fell once more, the battlefield descended into an eerie quiet. Both sides braced for what the next day would bring, knowing that the fight was far from over. On November 16th, the North Vietnamese launched a daring three-pronged assault on the American positions. Their strategy was to overwhelm the defenders from multiple directions, exploiting weaknesses in their perimeter. It was a bold move, one that risked heavy casualties but promised a decisive victory. The first wave of attackers struck just before dawn, their movements masked by the dense jungle. The Americans, though fatigued from 2 days of constant battle, were ready. Machine guns blazed as the soldiers held their positions, repelling wave after wave of attackers. On the eastern flank, the NBA managed to breach the defensive line briefly. Chaos erupted as hand-to-hand combat ensued, with soldiers on both sides fighting desperately to gain the upper hand. Colonel Moore, alerted to the breach, directed reinforcements to the area, and after a brutal struggle, the Americans regained control. Despite their losses, the North Vietnamese refused to relent. Their determination inspired awe and dread among the Americans, who marveled at the tenacity of their adversaries. The battle had become a grueling test of endurance, with no end in sight. As the morning of November 16 turned to afternoon, reinforcements arrived at LZ X-Ray. The 2nd Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, under Lieutenant Colonel Walter Tully, joined the fray, bolstering the embattled defenders. Their arrival marked a turning point, giving the Americans the strength to push back the relentless assaults. The North Vietnamese, recognizing the growing strength of the enemy, began to withdraw. Their retreat was not a sign of defeat but a strategic regrouping, allowing them to fight another day. For the Americans, the sight of their adversaries retreating brought a sense of relief tempered by the heavy losses they had suffered. Colonel Moore ordered his men to fortify their positions and prepare for evacuation. The helicopters that had sustained them throughout the battle now became their means of escape. One by one, the men were lifted out of the valley, leaving behind a battlefield that bore the scars of their struggle. By the evening of November 16, LZ X-Ray was secured. The battle, however, was far from over. The events at LZ Albany, just a few kilometers away, would soon plunge the soldiers into another deadly confrontation. On the morning of November 17, the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry Regiment, began its march from LZ X-Ray to LZ Albany, unaware of the ambush that awaited them. The soldiers moved cautiously through the jungle, their senses heightened by the events of the past 3 days. The column stretched over a kilometer, a vulnerable formation that the North Vietnamese were quick to exploit. As the Americans approached a clearing near LZ Albany, the NBA sprang their trap. Machine gun fire erupted from the tree-line, cutting through the column with devastating effect. The ambush descended into chaos as the Americans scrambled to find cover. The dense jungle that had concealed their enemy now became a hindrance, limiting their ability to maneuver. Communication lines broke down, and the battalion became fragmented into isolated pockets of resistance. The soldiers fought desperately to repel the attackers, their survival hinging on their ability to hold out until reinforcements could arrive. For many, the march to LZ Albany would become a harrowing memory of courage and loss. The ambush at LZ Albany marked one of the most devastating episodes of the DRANG campaign. The North Vietnamese, in their element within the dense jungle, exploited their knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect. For hours, the Americans fought in small, isolated groups, each man relying on his training and instincts to survive. Medics worked heroically under fire to save the wounded, while soldiers like Sergeant Ernie Savage rallied their comrades to mount a defense. Despite the chaos, the Americans held their ground, determined not to give the enemy a decisive victory. Helicopters once again became lifelines, braving enemy fire to evacuate the wounded. Pilots risked everything to extract soldiers from the killing zone, their courage a testament to the bond between those who fought on the ground and those who supported them from the air. By the end of the day, the battlefield was a scene of devastation. The Americans had suffered heavy losses, but their resilience and determination ensured that the North Vietnamese paid a steep price for their ambush. The battle at LZ Albany would go down in history as a brutal chapter in the IA DRANG campaign. As the night descended on November 17, the remnants of the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, dug in amidst the shattered terrain near LZ Albany. Exhausted, wounded, and scattered, the men clung to survival in the face of relentless pressure from the North Vietnamese forces. The dense jungle enveloped them, concealing both allies and enemies in a suffocating cloak of darkness. The North Vietnamese were unrelenting, launching probing attacks throughout the night to test the Americans' defenses. The sounds of rustling leaves and distant gunfire kept the soldiers on edge, their fingers trembling on the triggers of their rifles. Medics moved quietly among the wounded, administering aid under the faint glow of the moon. Lieutenant Colonel Walter Tully, commanding the battalion, worked feverishly to reorganize his men and re-establish communication with higher command. Despite the chaos, the resolve of the soldiers remained unbroken. In the midst of the carnage, Sergeant Ernie Savage assumed leadership of a small group of isolated men, rallying them to hold their ground. The night seemed endless, but every passing hour brought the hope of daylight and reinforcements. For the soldiers of the 7th Cavalry, survival was no longer just a mission, it was a personal battle against despair and the unyielding enemy. At dawn on November 18, the first rays of sunlight illuminated the battered landscape near LZ Albany. The long-awaited reinforcements from the 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry, finally began to arrive. Their presence brought a glimmer of hope to the embattled soldiers, many of whom had spent the night clinging to life. The reinforcements came under immediate fire as they approached the clearing. The North Vietnamese, determined to deny the Americans a chance to regroup, intensified their attacks. Despite the harrowing conditions, the reinforcements pushed forward, their arrival turning the tide of the battle. Helicopters swooped in to evacuate the wounded, their rotors whipping up clouds of dust and debris. Pilots continued to risk their lives, flying low over enemy positions to extract as many soldiers as possible. The bravery of the medevac crews became a lifeline for those who had endured the horrors of the ambush. By midday, the combined efforts of the reinforcements and the embattled troops forced the North Vietnamese to withdraw. The battlefield fell silent once more, leaving the Americans to confront the staggering losses they had suffered. The toll of the ambush at LZ Albany was devastating. Nearly 150 American soldiers were killed, and many more were wounded. The North Vietnamese also suffered heavy casualties, but their ability to engage the Americans so effectively reinforced their confidence in guerrilla warfare. Colonel Moore, though focused on the events at LZ X-Ray, felt the weight of the losses at Albany. He understood the magnitude of the battle and the lessons it offered for the future. The IA DRANG Valley had become a crucible, testing the resolve of both armies and revealing the brutal realities of modern warfare. Survivors of LZ Albany shared harrowing accounts of their ordeal, their voices capturing the human cost of the conflict. Soldiers like Sergeant Savage, who had shown extraordinary courage in the face of overwhelming odds, became symbols of the resilience and determination of the 7th Cavalry. As the soldiers regrouped and counted their losses, a somber realization settled over them: this was just the beginning. The war in Vietnam was far from over, and the lessons of IA DRANG would shape the strategies and sacrifices of the years to come. The Battle of IA DRANG, spanning 5 days of relentless combat, marked a turning point in the Vietnam War. It was the first major engagement between the United States and North Vietnamese forces, and its lessons would resonate for decades. For the Americans, the battle underscored the potential and limitations of air mobility. The ability to insert troops deep into enemy territory and sustain them with aerial resupply was revolutionary, but it also exposed them to the risks of isolation and ambush. The events at LZ Albany, in particular, highlighted the vulnerability of long columns in dense jungle terrain. For the North Vietnamese, DRANG validated their strategy of guerrilla warfare. Despite suffering heavy losses, they had demonstrated their ability to engage and inflict significant damage on a technologically superior enemy. Their resolve only hardened, fueling their determination to achieve victory through attrition. In the United States, news of the battle reverberated through military and political circles. While the engagement at LZ X-Ray was hailed as a tactical victory, the ambush at LZ Albany tempered the celebrations. The sobering reality of the war began to sink in, shaping public perception and influencing future decisions. Amid the chaos and carnage of the DRANG campaign, countless acts of heroism shone through. Colonel Halmore's leadership, both at LZ X-Ray and in the days that followed, became a testament to the importance of calm, decisive command under pressure. Bruce Crandall and Ed Freeman, the daring helicopter pilots who braved enemy fire to deliver supplies and evacuate the wounded, became legends in their own right. Their courage earned them the Medal of Honor, a recognition of the lives they saved through their relentless dedication. On the ground, soldiers like Sergeant Savage exemplified the spirit of the 7th Cavalry. His ability to inspire and lead his men in the face of overwhelming odds was a beacon of hope in the darkest hours. Medics, often overlooked in the heat of battle, worked tirelessly to save lives, their bravery etched into the memories of those they helped. The story of DRANG is not just one of strategy and tactics, it is a story of people. The soldiers, pilots, and medics who fought and bled in the valley became part of a legacy that would endure long after the guns fell silent. The story of Operation BABYLIFT. In the waning days of the Vietnam War, chaos gripped Saigon. The city, once bustling with the hum of commerce and tradition, now teetered on the edge of collapse. Fear hung thick in the air as the sound of approaching artillery filled the night. Among the turmoil, a daring and heart-wrenching mission unfolded, Operation BABYLIFT. This unprecedented humanitarian effort sought to rescue thousands of orphaned children, many of mixed heritage, from the ravages of war and secure them a future far away from the conflict's horrors. The story of Operation BABYLIFT is one of hope amidst despair, courage in the face of uncertainty, and the power of human compassion during one of history's darkest moments. This is a tale of those who risked everything for the innocent and the fragile, a narrative that binds the fates of children, soldiers, nurses, and pilots in the crucible of war. Saigon in April 1975 was a city in panic. The North Vietnamese army was advancing rapidly, leaving little hope for a South Vietnamese government already crumbling under the weight of decades of conflict. The streets were crowded with desperate families carrying all they could on their backs, hoping to flee before it was too late. Amid the chaos, an urgent directive came from President Gerald Ford's administration: evacuate the orphans. The plan was monumental in scale. Military aircraft, hastily converted into makeshift cradles, would carry the children to safety in countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia. Many of these orphans were Amerasian, the children of American soldiers and Vietnamese women, and they faced an uncertain future in a reunified Vietnam. Inside the U.S. Embassy, officials worked around the clock. Desks were piled high with documents, visas, and hastily prepared manifests. Colonel Bud Traynor, a U.S. Air Force officer, took command of the operation. His voice remained calm despite the tension in the air. Every moment lost meant more children at risk of being left behind. Meanwhile, Sister Joan Marie, a Catholic nun who had dedicated her life to caring for orphan children in Vietnam, gathered the little ones at the orphanage. Her heart was heavy as she reassured them with soft words and a warm smile, masking the anguish she felt. Each child carried a small bag of belongings, if they had any at all, and their names were hastily written on tags tied to their wrists. The first aircraft, a U.S. Air Force C-5A Galaxy, stood ready on the tarmac of Tan Son Nhut Air Base. The massive plane, a symbol of military might, had now been transformed into a vessel of hope. Crew members worked tirelessly to fit the cargo hold with rows of bassinets, cribs, and blankets. Nurses and volunteers carried babies and toddlers aboard, their cries mingling with the hum of the engines. Captain Dennis Bud Trainer, the pilot for this inaugural flight, had flown countless missions, but none like this. The stakes were higher than ever, and the cargo, human lives, was far more precious than any he had transported before. He glanced at his co-pilot, a young lieutenant whose hands trembled slightly on the controls. "We'll get them out," Trainer said firmly. The plane taxied down the runway, its engines roaring to life. Inside, Sister Joan Marie cradled an infant, singing softly to soothe the frightened child. Around her, volunteers offered reassuring words to the older children, who clung to their caretakers with wide, tear-filled eyes. As the plane lifted into the sky, a momentary sense of relief washed over the passengers and crew. But fate had other plans. Just minutes after takeoff, a mechanical failure caused a catastrophic loss of pressure. The plane lurched violently, and the crew fought to maintain control as cries of terror filled the cabin. The C-5A Galaxy spiraled downward, and chaos erupted inside. The sudden drop threw some of the crew and passengers against the walls of the plane. Captain Trainer's voice crackled over the intercom, urging everyone to brace for impact. Nurses and caretakers clung to the children, shielding them with their bodies. On the ground, emergency crews scrambled to respond as the plane crash-landed in a rice paddy just outside Saigon. Flames and smoke engulfed parts of the aircraft, and rescuers worked frantically to pull survivors from the wreckage. Despite the horror, acts of heroism emerged. Sister Joan Marie crawled through the debris, ignoring the searing pain in her leg, to gather frightened children. "Come with me," she said, her voice steady even as tears streamed down her face. Military personnel and Vietnamese villagers joined forces, forming a human chain to pass the children to safety. Of the 328 people on board, 138 lost their lives, including many children. For those who survived, the ordeal marked them forever. Captain Trainer, though shaken, vowed to see the operation continue. The tragedy, rather than halting Operation BABYLIFT, spurred an even greater urgency. The crash of the C-5A Galaxy sent shockwaves through the world. News outlets carried images of the wreckage, alongside heart-wrenching accounts of the lives lost. For many involved in the mission, the tragedy could have been a breaking point. But instead of halting Operation BABYLIFT, it ignited a fierce determination to continue. President Gerald Ford addressed the nation, expressing his sorrow over the loss and reaffirming the importance of the mission. "We will not let this tragedy deter us," he said firmly. The government promised full support, mobilizing resources to ensure the operation's success. Military and civilian volunteers surged forward, undeterred by the dangers. On the ground in Saigon, Sister Joan Marie worked tirelessly to comfort the surviving children. She collaborated with international aid organizations to arrange the next flights. Every face she encountered, whether a frightened child or a determined volunteer, reminded her of the mission's gravity. At Tan Son Nhut Air Base, mechanics worked with precision, ensuring the safety of the remaining planes. crews conducted extra inspections, and pilots received additional briefings. Each step was taken with care, as lives hung in the balance. The operation continued, its resolve unshaken. In the days that followed, the airlift resumed. Smaller planes replaced the giant C-5A Galaxy, and each departure was met with both relief and anxiety. Each flight was a gamble, threading the needle between operational challenges and the ever-encroaching North Vietnamese forces. Nurse Mary Evans, a volunteer from the United States, boarded one such flight. Her heart raced as she stepped onto the cramped aircraft, where rows of bassinets had been secured to the floor. The cries of infants filled the cabin, and Mary moved swiftly, ensuring every child was comfortable. The pilot, Captain Robert Hughes, maintained a steady demeanor as the plane climbed into the sky. "We'll be fine," he reassured his crew, though he knew the risks of anti-aircraft fire and mechanical failures. Every flight felt like a race against time, with the fragile hope of safety waiting on the other side. In Saigon, the orphanages became hubs of activity. Volunteers tagged children with identification labels, their small belongings packed in simple bags. Many of the children were too young to understand what was happening, their futures resting in the hands of strangers. For the caretakers who had nurtured them, saying goodbye was both a relief and a heartbreak. For the children evacuated during Operation BABYLIFT, the journey was surreal and overwhelming. Many had never been outside the walls of their orphanages, and now they were thrust into the unknown. The roar of the aircraft engines, the press of unfamiliar faces, and the separation from familiar caregivers created an atmosphere of confusion and fear. Among them was Min, a 5-year-old boy who clung tightly to a small wooden toy, a gift from his late mother. A volunteer nurse noticed his distress and knelt beside him. "You're brave, Min," she whispered, offering him a reassuring smile. Her words seemed to calm him, if only for a moment. The flights landed in cities across the world: San Francisco, Sydney, Toronto, and Paris. There, adoption agencies and host families waited anxiously. Each arrival was met with applause and tears, a testament to the sheer willpower that had made these moments possible. For Sister Joan Marie, seeing the children safely reach their destinations brought a mixture of emotions. She knew that many of them would never remember Vietnam or the sacrifices made for their escape. Yet, she believed in the promise of a better future. While Operation BABYLIFT successfully transported over 3,000 children to safety, the mission did not end at the landing strips. The next chapter of their journey presented its own set of challenges. Many of the orphans faced cultural barriers, language difficulties, and questions about their identities. For adoptive families, the joy of welcoming a new child was tempered by the recognition of the trauma these young ones carried. The Evans family, who adopted a baby girl named Lean, found themselves navigating sleepless nights and tearful days as the infant adjusted to her new world. Questions about the operation's ethics also arose. Critics questioned whether all the children evacuated were truly orphans or whether some had been separated from their families amidst the chaos. Investigations were launched, and while many found comfort in the mission's intentions, the complexities of war left few simple answers. Through it all, the volunteers and families who had stepped forward to help remained steadfast. For them, Operation BABYLIFT was not just about saving lives, it was about giving these children a chance to heal and thrive. As Operation BABYLIFT progressed, the weight of its purpose bore heavily on everyone involved. Pilots flew their missions with the knowledge that each flight carried the promise of life, or the potential for disaster. Mechanics double-checked every bolt and rivet on the planes, unwilling to leave any detail to chance. Captain Robert Hughes, who had flown several of the evacuation flights, found his thoughts consumed by the children. Each one of them has a story, he told his co-pilot after a particularly tense landing in San Francisco. We're not just flying cargo, we're carrying futures. His words echoed the sentiments of everyone working on the operation. In Saigon, the orphanages bustled with frenetic activity. Sister Joan Marie and other caretakers worked late into the night, ensuring each child was accounted for. She carried a notebook filled with names, birth dates, and photographs, small but vital details that could one day reconnect these children to their past. The Vietnamese staff, many of whom had to make the heart-wrenching decision to part with children they had raised, held back tears as they waved goodbye. They knew this might be the last time they would see these young faces. The sacrifices made by these unsung heroes became the backbone of Operation BABYLIFT. Operation BABYLIFT became a global effort, drawing support from countries far removed from the war. Nations such as Australia, Canada, and France opened their borders, offering homes to the orphan children. International charities mobilized quickly, coordinating resources and logistics to support the monumental undertaking. One of the key figures in this effort was Dr. Jane Thompson, an Australian pediatrician who volunteered her expertise. She flew to Saigon to assist in medical evaluations, ensuring that the children were healthy enough to endure the long flights. Her calm demeanor and tireless dedication became a source of strength for the overwhelmed staff. In the United States, grassroots efforts flourished. Families signed up to adopt or foster the children, while others donated supplies and funds. Churches and community centers held vigils, praying for the safe passage of each flight. The images of tiny faces, often peering out from blankets or bassinets, stirred hearts worldwide. Despite the global goodwill, the operation faced challenges. Cultural misunderstandings and language barriers created occasional friction between volunteers and local staff. Yet, the shared commitment to the children's safety bridged these divides, uniting strangers in a singular cause. Among the many children evacuated during Operation BABYLIFT were stories of incredible survival and resilience. Mai, a 3-year-old girl found wandering the streets of Saigon after her family's home was destroyed, became a symbol of hope for the volunteers who cared for her. Mai was flown to the United States, where she was adopted by the Parkers, a family in Seattle. Though initially shy and withdrawn, Mai slowly opened up with the love and patience of her new parents. Decades later, she would recount her journey in interviews, advocating for the importance of compassion during times of crisis. Another story was that of Lin, an infant who was one of the few survivors of the tragic C-5A Galaxy crash. Rescued from the wreckage by a Vietnamese farmer, Lin's journey took her from the chaos of war to a peaceful home in France. Her adoptive parents often marveled at her resilience, cherishing her as a living testament to the strength of the human spirit. For each child, the journey was unique, marked by both challenges and triumphs. These stories, though personal, were part of a larger narrative, the enduring impact of Operation BABYLIFT on countless lives. As the world celebrated the bravery and compassion behind Operation BABYLIFT, controversies began to emerge. Questions arose about the accuracy of records for some of the children. Were they truly orphans, or had they been separated from living parents during the chaos of war? Human rights organizations voiced concerns, urging greater oversight in the adoption process. Some families in Vietnam claimed they had been misled into relinquishing their children, believing the evacuations were temporary. These revelations cast a shadow over the operation's legacy. Colonel Bud Traynor, who had overseen much of the mission, defended its intentions. "We were trying to save lives in the middle of a war zone," he explained during a press conference. "Mistakes may have been made, but our goal was always to protect these children." His words resonated with many, though the criticisms remained. Efforts were made to address these concerns. Investigations were launched to trace the origins of children with incomplete records. Some organizations began facilitating reunions for adoptees who wished to reconnect with their roots, offering a path to healing for those affected. As North Vietnamese forces closed in on Saigon, the urgency of Operation BABYLIFT escalated. Each day brought new risks, with shelling and air raids threatening the city. Tan Son Nhut Air Base, the lifeline of the evacuation, became a target for enemy fire. Volunteers and military personnel worked under the constant hum of danger, their resolve unwavering. Colonel Bud Traynor coordinated operations with precision, balancing the chaos on the ground with the demands of international coordination. "We can't afford delays," he told his team during one briefing. "Every hour counts." The base was a flurry of activity, with planes being loaded, manifests double-checked, and children carried to safety. Among the most critical challenges was ensuring the safety of the flights themselves. Military and civilian pilots flew with the knowledge that anti-aircraft fire or mechanical failure could end their missions abruptly. They pushed forward regardless, knowing the lives of innocent children depended on their courage. For the volunteers, the work was exhausting but vital. Nurse Mary Evans recalled tending to dozens of children on one flight, many of whom were sick or malnourished. "We had to be strong for them," she said. "They needed us to hold them, to reassure them that everything would be okay." As April 1975 drew to a close, Saigon was on the brink of collapse. The streets were filled with families desperately seeking a way out, and the air was thick with fear and desperation. For those involved in Operation BABYLIFT, the mission became even more perilous. The orphanages, once crowded with children awaiting evacuation, had dwindling numbers as flights continued to depart. Sister Joan Marie and her team worked tirelessly to process the remaining children. Each departure was bittersweet, a relief that another group was safe, yet a heartbreak for the lives left behind. The final flights were the most harrowing. Pilots navigated through increasingly dangerous conditions, with reports of enemy forces moving closer to the airfield. On one such flight, Captain Robert Hughes recalled the tense moments before takeoff as shells exploded in the distance. "I could feel the weight of it," he said. "Every second felt like an eternity." On April 29, as Saigon fell to North Vietnamese forces, the last Operation BABYLIFT flight departed. The children on board represented the final hope of the mission, their tiny faces a poignant reminder of all that had been lost and saved during the war. For the children who survived the harrowing journey, the landings in their new countries marked the beginning of a new chapter. Airports across the world became scenes of emotional reunions, with adoptive families and volunteers welcoming the orphans into their lives. In San Francisco, one of the largest hubs for Operation BABYLIFT arrivals, crowds gathered to meet the planes. Families held signs and banners, while reporters documented the momentous occasion. Among the children was Min, who clutched his wooden toy as he was carried off the plane. The Evans family, who had agreed to adopt him, welcomed him with open arms. Adjusting to a new life was not without challenges. For many of the children, the transition was jarring. They faced language barriers, cultural differences, and the lingering trauma of war. But adoptive families, supported by community organizations and social workers, worked tirelessly to help them feel at home. Despite the difficulties, stories of resilience and hope emerged. Families shared accounts of their adopted children thriving in their new environments, pursuing education, and building lives far removed from the chaos of their early years. For many, the success of these children became the ultimate vindication of Operation BABYLIFT. The legacy of Operation BABYLIFT extended far beyond its immediate impact. For many, it became a symbol of the humanitarian spirit amidst the devastation of war. The courage of those who participated, pilots, nurses, caretakers, and volunteers, was celebrated in communities around the world. In the years that followed, reunions and retrospectives brought the story of Operation BABYLIFT back into the spotlight. Survivors, now adults, shared their experiences, shedding light on the operation's profound personal and cultural implications. Min, now a doctor, spoke at one such event. "I owe my life to those who believed in a better future," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. Controversies and criticisms persisted, particularly regarding the operation's ethical complexities. But even its critics acknowledged the undeniable good that had come from the effort. For thousands of children, Operation BABYLIFT had provided a chance at life and hope. As monuments and memorials were erected to honor those involved, the story of Operation BABYLIFT lived on. It became a testament to the power of compassion and a reminder of the sacrifices made during one of history's darkest times. The story of Operation ARCLIGHT. The skies above Southeast Asia were a canvas of turmoil during the Vietnam War, painted with trails of contrails and the deafening roar of strategic bombers. Operation ARCLIGHT, a campaign launched in 1965, marked a pivotal shift in the war's air strategy. Utilizing the massive Boeing B-52 Stratofortresses of the U.S. Air Force, the operation sought to cripple enemy strongholds and supply lines across Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. This story delves into the intricate web of tactical decisions, political pressure, and the raw courage of the individuals caught in this historic endeavor. In the spring of 1965, the Pentagon buzzed with activity. Analysts pored over reconnaissance photographs, their brows furrowed as they plotted targets deep in enemy territory. The Viet Cong's guerrilla tactics and hidden supply lines had rendered conventional strategies ineffective. The answer, according to General Curtis LeMay, was simple: overwhelming firepower from above. On Guam's Andersen Air Force Base, rows of B-52 bombers glinted under the tropical sun. Each was a titan of the skies, capable of delivering devastating payloads over vast distances. Their crews, a mix of seasoned pilots and young airmen fresh from training, prepared for the unknown. Among them was Captain James Hanley, a reserved yet confident navigator, whose steady voice often guided missions through stormy weather and enemy fire. As the operation loomed, President Lyndon B. Johnson wrestled with its implications. He understood the risk of escalating tensions but deemed the operation essential to support ground forces struggling in Vietnam. Operation ARCLIGHT, a codename as enigmatic as its purpose, was officially greenlit. On June 18, 1965, the rumble of engines filled the pre-dawn air. Captain Hanley and his crew climbed into their assigned B-52, nicknamed Iron Angel. Their target was a suspected Viet Cong stronghold near Ben Cat. In tandem with several other bombers, their mission was to unleash the might of strategic air power against the unseen enemy. As Iron Angel ascended, the atmosphere inside the aircraft was tense. Radio chatter buzzed with updates, and the electronic warfare officer, Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, monitored potential enemy radar signals. Despite the tension, each crew member performed their role with precision, their training taking over. The bombing run was swift and calculated. From an altitude of 30,000 feet, the B-52s released a deluge of bombs that turned the jungle below into a fiery inferno. The ground forces reported back, the strike had disrupted enemy movements, though the full extent of the damage would take weeks to assess. Back at Andersen Air Force Base, the returning crews were met with subdued applause. The success of the first strike brought a momentary sense of relief, but the war was far from over. Captain Hanley, staring at the horizon, muttered, "This is just the beginning." By late 1965, Operation ARCLIGHT expanded into Laos and Cambodia, targeting the infamous Ho Chi Minh Trail. The trail, a labyrinth of hidden paths and tunnels, served as a lifeline for the North Vietnamese Army, NBA. Its destruction became the operation's primary focus. In a makeshift operations room, Intelligence Officer Major Karen Foster briefed the crews. Aerial reconnaissance had identified suspicious movements near the Mujia Pass. "This isn't just about dropping bombs," she emphasized. "It's about precision in cutting off their supply lines." One of the crews assigned to this mission included Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, a radar navigator whose expertise in deciphering terrain data was unparalleled. The mission involved high-altitude bombing through dense cloud cover, relying solely on radar. As the B-52s roared through the night sky, Ortiz's eyes scanned the flickering radar screen. "2 clicks to the left," he instructed, guiding the bomber toward the target. The bombing run was executed flawlessly, but the aftermath revealed the challenge of such operations. While parts of the trail were obliterated, the enemy adapted quickly, using decoys and repairing the damage under cover of darkness. For the crews, the war became a constant cycle of destruction and reconstruction. Yet, the resolve of men and women like Ortiz and Foster remained unshaken, even as the conflict's complexity deepened. By early 1966, Operation ARCLIGHT intensified its reach, striking deeper into the dense jungles of Vietnam. The sprawling canopy concealed underground bunkers, supply caches, and staging areas for the Viet Cong. The B-52 crews knew their missions were pivotal, but they were flying into the unknown, where the jungle swallowed even the most sophisticated surveillance. Captain James Hanley was now a seasoned veteran, having completed dozens of missions. On this day, his crew was assigned a critical strike near the Iron Triangle, a stronghold north of Saigon. Intelligence suggested that the area housed a major Viet Cong command center. Hanley and his co-pilot, Lieutenant Mark Everett, reviewed the flight plan with a quiet intensity, each movement precise and deliberate. The mission was fraught with challenges. Heavy cloud cover forced the bombers to rely on radar-guided targeting. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, now a trusted voice in the crew, coordinated with ground forces to confirm the target's location. As the bombs fell, the earth below erupted, shaking the hidden fortifications. Yet, as the B-52s turned for home, Hanley knew the jungle had a way of hiding its wounds. Reports from the ground later revealed partial success, some bunkers destroyed, but others remained intact. The enemy's resilience was unnerving. For the crews, the Iron Triangle became a symbol of the war's complexity, where every victory seemed to carry an equal measure of uncertainty. In the summer of 1966, Operation ARCLIGHT expanded its efforts into Laos, focusing on the labyrinthine Ho Chi Minh Trail. Each mission required meticulous planning, as the trail wove through mountains and valleys, protected by anti-aircraft artillery in natural terrain. The enemy's ingenuity in camouflage made each bombing run a test of skill and endurance. One crew tasked with this mission was led by Major Karen Foster, now flying as a mission commander. Her leadership in the operations room had earned her a spot aboard the bombers she helped guide. "This is more than charts and maps now," she told her crew, a mix of veterans and rookies. "We're in this together." The target was a network of supply depots near Chepone, a critical junction on the trail. The approach was treacherous, with anti-aircraft fire lighting up the night sky. Foster's voice remained steady over the intercom, directing the crew through evasive maneuvers. The bombs hit their mark, turning the depots into plumes of fire visible for miles. But the celebration was short-lived. As the bombers regrouped, one of the B-52s was hit by enemy fire. Watching the fiery descent of the aircraft from her window, Foster whispered a silent prayer. The war was unrelenting, and the cost of each mission weighed heavily on those who survived. By 1967, the North Vietnamese army had grown adept at countering Operation ARCLIGHT. Decoys, rapid repairs, and hidden tunnels made it increasingly difficult to cripple their supply lines. For the B-52 crews, this meant longer missions, more complex targeting, and greater risks. Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz found himself at the center of this evolving war. His radar expertise was critical as missions now required pinpoint accuracy to avoid civilian casualties while maximizing impact. In one mission targeting an NBA logistics hub near Key Sand, Ortiz worked closely with Captain Hanley. The operation required split-second decisions. As the radar screen flickered, Ortiz identified a cluster of enemy trucks. "Adjust 2 degrees south," he instructed. Hanley complied, and moments later, the payload was released. The explosions below signaled a direct hit, but Ortiz knew the enemy would find another way to move their supplies. Ground reports confirmed significant damage to the logistics hub, but also highlighted the difficulty of sustaining pressure. The enemy's ability to adapt was a stark reminder of the war's endless cycle. Yet, for the crews of Operation ARCLIGHT, each mission was a necessary step in a conflict where even the smallest victory carried immense weight. As the war dragged into 1968, the toll of Operation ARCLIGHT was evident. For the men and women involved, the mission was no longer just about tactics, it was about endurance. The constant roar of engines, the tension of evasive maneuvers, and the ever-present specter of enemy fire left scars on both the body and mind. Captain Hanley had begun to notice the fatigue among his crew. Even Lieutenant Donovan, whose sharp wit often kept spirits high, seemed quieter these days. The mission briefing that morning was somber. A suspected Viet Cong base in the A Shau Valley needed to be neutralized. The valley, a natural fortress, had become a critical point of contention in the war. As Iron Angel soared over the valley, the landscape below was shrouded in mist. The target was hidden, and anti-aircraft fire began to pepper the sky. Hanley's calm voice guided the crew, but even he felt the strain of the relentless missions. When the bombs were finally dropped, the crew watched as the valley erupted in a cascade of fire and smoke. Back at base, the crew was met with the usual mix of relief and exhaustion. For Hanley and his comrades, the war was an unending sky full of shadows, a constant reminder of the lives they sought to save and the destruction they left behind. The year 1968 brought new challenges to Operation ARCLIGHT as the enemy adapted with tactics that made detection and targeting even more difficult. The Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army, NVA, intensified their use of underground tunnels and camouflage, blending into the terrain with an uncanny ability to evade aerial reconnaissance. For the B-52 crews, every mission became a test of patience and precision. Major Karen Foster, now a seasoned strategist, led the planning for a strike against a critical segment of the Ho Chi Minh Trail near the A Shau Valley. The target was a supply depot cleverly concealed in dense jungle. Satellite images and reconnaissance aircraft could barely make out the outlines of structures buried beneath layers of vegetation. "This isn't just a bombing run," Foster told her team. "It's a battle of wits." The mission required a coordinated strike involving multiple B-52s. Captain James Hanley and Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz were among the crews tasked with delivering the payload. Ortiz, ever diligent, adjusted the radar meticulously as the jungle-covered target came into focus. With the signal locked, Hanley gave the command to release the bombs. The forest below erupted in flames, but the enemy's tunnels absorbed much of the impact. The ground reports confirmed the partial destruction of the depot, but not without losses. Enemy anti-aircraft fire claimed another B-52, a grim reminder of the operation's cost. The unseen foe continued to haunt the skies, a constant reminder of the complexities of the Vietnam War. As 1969 unfolded, the U.S. military began focusing on Cambodia, where intelligence suggested the NVA had established hidden sanctuaries. These areas served as staging grounds for attacks into South Vietnam, and Operation ARCLIGHT was tasked with disrupting their operations. The political stakes were higher than ever, as the Cambodian incursions risked international backlash. The mission briefings took on a different tone. President Richard Nixon, recently inaugurated, pushed for decisive action. The Pentagon's orders were clear: strike swiftly and with overwhelming force. Captain Hanley's crew was assigned a high-priority mission targeting a suspected command post near the Cambodian border. The approach was fraught with tension. The bombers flew low, hugging the terrain to avoid detection. Inside Iron Angel, the crew remained silent, each focused on their role. Lieutenant Sarah Donovan, monitoring enemy radar signals, issued warnings as anti-aircraft fire lit up the night sky. "Stay steady," Hanley urged, his voice calm but firm. When the bombs were released, the explosions reverberated across the jungle. The mission was a success, with significant damage reported to the command post. Yet, as the bombers returned to base, the political fallout began. News of the strikes leaked, sparking controversy back home. For the crews, it was a stark reminder that their war was fought on multiple fronts, on the battlefield and in the court of public opinion. By 1970, the strain of Operation ARCLIGHT was felt across the U.S. Air Force. The relentless pace of missions, combined with the mounting casualties, left many questioning the long-term effectiveness of the campaign. Despite the doubts, the bombers continued to fly, their missions targeting ever-deepening layers of the enemy's infrastructure. One such mission targeted a vast network of supply routes near the Laotian town of Ban Ban. Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz, now a respected figure among the radar operators, led the targeting efforts. The complexity of the terrain required near-perfect coordination between the bombers and reconnaissance aircraft. As the B-52s reached the target area, Ortiz identified a cluster of vehicles and storage facilities on his radar. "We have a clean shot," he said, directing the payload release. The ensuing explosions left craters visible for miles, but the enemy's resilience was once again on display. Within days, the supply routes showed signs of repair. The war's cyclical nature weighed heavily on the crews. Captain Hanley, now a veteran of countless missions, reflected on the toll. "We keep hitting them, and they keep rebuilding," he said to Donovan after the debrief. "It feels like a battle without an end." In early 1971, Operation ARCLIGHT shifted focus once more, targeting fortified areas in Cambodia. The controversial campaign aimed to dismantle the NVA's cross-border sanctuaries and cut off their access to South Vietnam. For the crews, these missions represented some of the most dangerous and politically charged operations to date. Major Karen Foster was now deeply involved in planning these strikes. Her detailed analysis of enemy positions highlighted a series of bunkers and tunnel systems near the town of Snoil. The operation called for a coordinated strike involving multiple waves of B-52s. Foster's voice carried an air of urgency as she briefed the crews. "These targets are crucial. We need to make this count." Captain Hanley's crew was among the first to take off. The night sky was eerily calm as the bombers approached the target zone. Anti-aircraft fire erupted as they descended to their release altitude, shaking Iron Angel violently. Hanley's hands gripped the controls tightly, his focus unbroken. The bombs fell with precision, shattering the jungle canopy and exposing the enemy's hidden positions. As the bombers turned for home, the crew caught a glimpse of the devastation below, smoke rising from what had been an impenetrable fortress. Yet, as they landed back at Anderson Air Force Base, the weight of their actions lingered. The war had turned into a conflict of shadows, where each success carried an equal measure of uncertainty. By mid-1971, Operation ARCLIGHT began to encounter limitations not just from the battlefield but from growing political and logistical constraints. The war was becoming increasingly unpopular back in the United States, with protests erupting over the extensive bombing campaigns in Cambodia and Laos. Despite these challenges, the mission persisted, targeting enemy strongholds with unrelenting force. Lieutenant Samuel Ortiz had become a cornerstone of his crew, his radar expertise vital in navigating the complex terrain and ensuring precise strikes. On a mission targeting the border town of Chepon in Laos, Ortiz felt the mounting pressure. Intelligence reports suggested a significant buildup of enemy forces, but weather conditions made visibility poor. As the B-52s approached the target, Ortiz carefully adjusted the radar, calling out adjustments to Captain Hanley. "We're almost there," he said, his voice calm but strained. The payload was released, and the jungle below lit up in a fiery cascade. Ground reports later confirmed substantial damage to enemy infrastructure, but it came at a cost. A B-52 in the formation failed to return, the victim of concentrated anti-aircraft fire. Back at base, the mood was somber. The war was shifting, and for many involved, each mission felt more precarious than the last. Despite their successes, the enemy's ability to adapt and endure seemed almost insurmountable. As 1972 dawned, the Vietnam War entered a critical phase. The North Vietnamese Army launched its Easter Offensive, a massive campaign designed to overwhelm South Vietnamese forces. Operation ARCLIGHT was called upon to deliver decisive air power to halt the advancing enemy. For the B-52 crews, this was a turning point, a chance to prove the operation's worth in a full-scale confrontation. Captain Hanley's crew was assigned to strike a key logistics hub near Unlock, a town under siege. The situation was desperate, with South Vietnamese forces barely holding the line. "This one's different," Hanley told his crew. The stakes couldn't be higher. The mission demanded precision bombing to avoid friendly casualties. Lieutenant Ortiz worked tirelessly, guiding the aircraft through layers of anti-aircraft fire. When the bombs were finally released, they struck with devastating accuracy, breaking the enemy's grip on critical supply lines. The ground forces reported a significant reprieve, but the battle was far from over. The success at Unlock was a testament to the crew's dedication, but it also underscored the human cost of war. Hanley and his team returned to base knowing that while they had made a difference that day, the larger conflict raged on with no clear end in sight. Later in 1972, Operation Linebacker 2, a key component of ARCLIGHT, brought the B-52s to Hanoi and Haiphong, the heart of North Vietnam. Known as the Christmas bombing, this campaign aimed to bring North Vietnam to the negotiating table by striking its industrial and logistical core. For the crews, it was the culmination of years of relentless missions. The air over Hanoi was a maelstrom of anti-aircraft fire and surface-to-air missiles, SAMs. Major Karen Foster, now an integral part of mission planning, warned the crews of the immense risks. "This isn't like anything we've faced before," she said. "Stay focused and trust your training." Captain Hanley's bomber, Iron Angel, was part of the first wave. The crew's nerves were palpable as they approached their target, a rail yard critical to North Vietnam's supply chain. Sam streaked through the sky, forcing Hanley to take evasive maneuvers. "Brace for impact," shouted Lieutenant Donovan as a missile detonated nearby, shaking the aircraft violently. Despite the chaos, the mission was a success. The rail yard was destroyed, and similar strikes across Hanoi and Haiphong crippled the enemy's war effort. The bombers returned to Andersen Air Force Base battered but triumphant. The Christmas bombing marked a turning point, forcing North Vietnam to reconsider its position in peace talks. As 1973 approached, the end of Operation ARCLIGHT came into view. The Paris Peace Accords signaled a potential resolution to the conflict, and the U.S. began winding down its involvement in Vietnam. For the B-52 crews, the final missions carried a mix of relief and reflection. One of the last strikes targeted a suspected arms depot near Quang Tri. Captain Hanley, Lieutenant Ortiz, and the rest of the Iron Angel crew flew what they knew might be their final sortie. The mission was executed with the precision that had become their hallmark, and the depot was successfully neutralized. Upon returning to base, the crew gathered for a quiet moment. Major Foster, who had been instrumental in the operations planning, joined them. "We did what we could," she said softly. "History will judge the rest." Operation ARCLIGHT officially concluded in August 1973, leaving behind a legacy of strategic airpower and its profound impact on the Vietnam War. For the men and women who flew those missions, it was a chapter in their lives marked by courage, sacrifice, and the weight of a war that defined a generation.